وبركاته. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونتوب إليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. أما بعد، فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله، وأحسن الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، وشر الأمور محدثاتها، وكل محدثة بدعة، وكل بدعة ضلالة، وكل ضلالة في النار. I'd first like to start my lectures with a word of thanks and a word of apology. As far as the word of apology is that my throat has some sort of cold in it, so my voice might not be distinct as normally it is. So I apologize if you have any difficulty in understanding me. Just, make some sort of hand motion. I'll try to speak a little bit more clearer. That's difficulty because of my throat, not because of my American accent. The second word, of course, is a word of thanks. I'd like to thank the brothers and sisters of Jam'iyyah Ihya Minhaj Sunnah, and of course, first and foremost, our dear brother in Islam, Abu Muntasar, for always welcoming us to your country and allowing us to come and give lectures between you, hoping that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala benefits us from these talks in a manner which pleases Him. My second word of thanks, of course, is to the owners or the people who are in charge of this establishment, kindly opening up their facility for us this morning and allowing us to speak about this very important topic. This day being the 9th of Ramadan in the year 1414 after the hijrah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, equivalent to the 19th of February 1994, according to the reckoning of the years of the Christians. Now, this series of lectures, which you are, I'm sure, aware of, is called The Characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is really the final chapter in a long number of lectures that I have been delivering, I guess, for the last 2 years, starting off on the 27th of Rajab and 28th of Rajab, which was like February 1st and 2nd of 1992, when myself and my dear brother, Sheikh Hadith Palmer, delivered a number of lectures on the introduction to Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the city of Philadelphia, in the United States. And the majority of the cassettes of these lectures have been taped and alhamdulillah have been brought here to the United Kingdom for you to benefit. Most important of these lectures, in my view, is an introduction to the manhaj, or the methodology of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in their receiving of their faith, and how they acquire their faith, their aqidah, and in how they derive the issues of this faith, this aqidah, and how they refute those who go against their faith. And this is in 4 cassettes, which was done in Boulder, Colorado. And basically it's somewhat of a more detailed explanation of the lecture which I delivered in your conference last April. The second series of the lecture is Tawheed, or the second part of these lectures is Tawheed of the Prophets and the Messengers, in which I took one of the works of Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah concerning the Tawheed of the Prophets and the Messengers, and I explained that, and that's in about 6 or 7 cassettes, also which is done in Boulder, Colorado. The third lecture, of course, third part of it is what I did amongst you in London last summer, Aqid al-Wasatiyah, and the fourth part of the series is Al-Aqid al-Hamawiyah, also by Ibn Taymiyyah, which I did in New York City about 2 months ago. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this is that I think that in order for us to benefit from these lectures which I'll be giving today, inshallah, it's important that the brothers attempt to listen to those other cassettes, because really these lectures is a series of talks, and therefore they are, in my mind, inseparable from one another. So I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow these cassettes to be spread amongst you, and that He does not deny us the reward of these efforts, and He makes it from the useful knowledge which we will all benefit upon the Day of Judgment. And shortly I think the cassette should be in your hands. The other introductory remark I'd like to make is that when we're talking about the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in these lectures, who am I addressing? I'm addressing Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah themselves. The benefit and the value of these lectures are only for those people who adhere to the way of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Those amongst the Muslims who have deviated from this way, from this methodology, this manhaj, and are not from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, our discussion begins with them concerning the methodology itself, or concerning the particular issues in which they deviate with us. And I'll give you an example. For instance, we know that the Shia revile the Prophet's characteristics or the qualities of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. But rather we would discuss, this is part of our manhaj, our methodology of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, which is the position of the companions in the religion of Islam, radiallahu anhum. Likewise, if somebody deviated with us concerning a particular matter from the aqidah of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, like those who deny Allah's sifat and explain them with metaphorical explanations, like saying that Allah is not upon His throne, but rather that He has conquered His throne, and that the throne is not something which exists, but rather it is a metaphorical or an allegorical explanation of the universe. Our discussion with them is not concerning the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, but our discussion then begins with them first with how do we understand Allah's names and attributes. And those other lectures which I alluded to earlier a few moments ago sets out and deals with the methodology of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah and their creed, how they derive their faith, how they deduce the specific issues of their faith, and then a discussion of what are those matters of their faith. And plus some sort of, sometimes I allude to how they refer to those people who go derivation of their faith, or either the quadering of their faith or derivation of the matter. Discussing here today, and I want this we understand this very importantly because it's we understand this carefully before we proceed into these lectures, is that we're discussing the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. In other words, we, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace and mercy, has guided us that we would like to adhere to the way of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And this adherence to their way, in terms of our beliefs, in terms of our worship, in terms of our behavior and our manners, results in certain characteristics that distinguishes us from all other Muslims. What are these characteristics? And by learning these characteristics, we can see that when we deviate sometimes from the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, either by being extreme in some cases, or by being negligent at other times. Now, before I proceed, we need to introduce ourselves or refresh our memories concerning who do we mean by Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. We know that the Sunnah in this sense refers to the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore is equivalent to the religion which Allah sent him with. It's equivalent to Shari'ah. And so therefore the Sunnah in this sense means the religion of Islam. And it refers to the Prophet's companions, those who gathered upon this Sunnah, this religion which Allah sent the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with, and did not deviate from, neither in their beliefs or their worship or their behavior. And all those who adhere to their way thereafter in the following centuries. And the term Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah has two connotations used in the books of the scholars. And often brothers, especially those who are engaged in dawah during this time, confuse the two connotations. On the one sense, when you say Ahlus Sunnah, there's a general sense to it. And that just means that you're not from the Shia. You're not a Shiite. And then there's a specific sense of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which means that you're upon that way of Ahlul Hadith. And often those who give da'wah confuse these two understandings. When Ibn Taymiyyah wrote his classical work in refutation of the Shia, Minhaj al-Sunnah al-Nabawiyah, the way of the prophetic Sunnah, meaning the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in refutation of the Shia and the Qadariyah, he meant by this all those who were non-Shia, all those who were Shia, whether they were Maturidis, whether they were Sufis, or whether from Ahlul Hadith. He did not revile the Prophet's companions, and did not overpraise the Prophet's family, raising them to a position which they do not deserve, by either deifying them or saying that they have qualities which belong to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, like that they are ma'asumeen, that they do not err or sin, and these types of extremisms. So in this sense, and this is what you find, for instance, in the newspaper. If you were to read an article in the newspaper, London Times is a newspaper here, Guardian or something like that, the Guardian for instance, and they might be describing some sort of event in the Islamic world. They might say that a person is either a Shi'i or a Sunni, in the general sense. I mean, even the Christians refer to it in that general sense. They'll say, for instance, the people in Iran are Shia, and they'll say the people, for instance, in Egypt are Sunnis. Irrespective of whether they're upon the way of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ or not, but just in the meaning that they are not Shia. But that's not the intent here by Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. What we are looking for here is a specific sense of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. And that is those, Ahlul Hadith does not mean those who just work in the science, meaning the Muhaddithun, but rather it means a methodology and a way of understanding the religion which the earlier scholars inherited from the Prophet's companions. among whom would be Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Abu Hanifa, Nu'man bin Thabit, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ibn Mubarak, Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawud, and others of such caliber who are recognized to be from Ahlul Hadith. Likewise, in this sense, they are the saved group in the hereafter. Because you know the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ who said that, in which he mentioned that his nation, his community, his ummah, would divide into 73 groups. 72 of which would go into hell, and only one would be saved. One asked as to the identity of the saved group. The Prophet ﷺ said, it is those who are upon what I am upon and my companions. مَا أَنَا عَلَيْهِ وَأَصْحَابِي. This is a Hasan hadith which is reported by Tirmidhi and others. And likewise, they are the victorious group in this world. When the Prophet ﷺ said they are all truth, victorious, and they are unharmed by those who quit them, who abandon or go against until the coming of the hour of judgment. And another narration said until the last of them fight at Dajjal. So when the scholars of Islam identify the victorious group in this world, or identify the saved group in the hereafter, that you will find they say it's Ahlul Hadith. And Ahlul Hadith here means Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. But not in the general sense of Ahlus Sunnah, but in the specific sense. As far as the general sense of Ahlus Sunnah, in the sense that he's not a Shi'i, he's a Sunni in the sense that he's not a Shi'i, then these characteristics do not apply upon these people. Okay? Is this clear, inshallah? For instance, now, when we're going to discuss these characteristics, which I've identified 15 characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, we do not mean just those who are non-Shia. These characteristics do not fall upon the Sufis. I mean the earlier Sufis who were identified with Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, not these Sufis of today, or the Ash'aris, or the Maturidis, or those groups who adhere to Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah only in the general sense, since they're not Shia. So those are a few introductory words, and if there's some confusion, further address it in the question and answer session. Characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We should remember that these characteristics are shared characteristics amongst them. No matter, even with their differences that exist between them. In other words, if you look at Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah and the differences that exist between them, whether it's in terms of the historical period which they lived. And for instance, if you're going to now compare the scholars of the Tabi'een, like Al-Hasan al-Basri, and Mujahid, and Ikrimah, and others from the Tabi'een amongst many, and you were to discuss the scholars of the 3rd century, like Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and the Shafi'i, and al-Bukhari, and Muslim, and al-Nasa'i, and others, and discuss the scholars of the 8th century, like Ibn Taymiyyah, and Ibn al-Qayyim, and al-Zahabi, and Ibn Kathir, or discuss the scholars of our present time, who are identified with Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, like Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymeen, or Al-Albani, you find that these characteristics are shared by them all, even though they lived in different time periods. And even though they might have different regions, some of them might have lived in Bukhara, some of them might have lived in Al-Andalus, which is in Polar, some of them might have lived in Mecca and Medina. Yet even though that they differed in terms of the periods of history in which they occupied, or in terms of the regions of the earth in which they lived, they still had certain characteristics which you can find in them. And that is why if you look at the writings of someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, for instance, and you look at the writings of somebody of our time like Ibn Uthaymeen, you find that they're as if it is the same person talking to you. There's no difference. And this is because they have the same manhaj. That manhaj and that same aqidah which I discussed in those other lectures which I alluded to earlier. Also, even though that the people of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah also differ in terms of their adherence to the Sunnah and their understanding of the Sunnah. I mean, without doubt, the Prophet's companions understood the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and adhered to that Sunnah better and were more knowledgeable and more adhering to it than any other of mankind. And likewise, the earlier Muslims that occupied the first third in their understanding and their adherence to the Sunnah than those Muslims in the Middle Ages. And likewise, those scholars who lived during the time of the Middle Ages, let's say like Ibn Taymiyyah, they understood and adhered to the Sunnah better than the people of today. As scholars, and also as general folk, as common Muslims who are upon the Sunnah and the Jama'ah, like ourselves, young men and women. So even with this difference that existed in them, in terms of the time periods they lived, in terms of the regions of the earth which they occupied, or in terms of their knowledge and their adherence to the Sunnah, yet we still find these shared characteristics amongst them. And this is without doubt one of the signs of Allah that they're upon the truth. Because had they not been upon the truth, you would find much difference amongst them. just like you find much difference in the other groups and the other madahib. If one studies the historical development of the Shia or the Sufis, one finds that those original propagators of Shi'ism or of Sufism were on a completely different track than the Shia and the Sufi of today. However, though the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and the specific sense of Ahlul Hadith, are living throughout the centuries and through the different periods of the earth, between themselves, some greater than the others, and adhere to the Sunnah in different degrees. With this few words of introduction, we'd like to now get into the lecture. I think that the characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah can be best described in a single word, which is identified by Ibn Taymiyyah, and that is, he describes Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah as أنهم يتبعون الحق ويرحمون الخلق, that they follow the truth and they show mercy toward the creation. This is, if somebody was to ask you, explain to me the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, one could answer truthfully by just these few words, that they follow the truth and they show mercy toward the creation. And our deviation from the way of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah occurs when we fall short in either of these two matters. Either when we do not follow the truth to the fullest, or when we do not show mercy toward the creation to the fullest. Whenever that occurs, then therefore we are deviated from the way of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah we do not fulfill these characteristics to their fullest. Obviously these few words, even though they're truthful, they are all comprised of some further explanation. And therefore, I have taken 15 characteristics or 14 characteristics, which I found in the books of certain scholars, which explain this statement by Ibn Taymiyyah, that they follow the truth and they show mercy to the creation. And inshallah ta'ala, what we'd like to do in these sessions today is discuss these 14 points, that it might enlighten us to the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that we may truly become from them, not only in terms of we like to identify ourselves from them, but that in our nature and our behavior, we truly become men and women of the Sunnah and of the Jama'ah. The first characteristic which distinguishes Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah from all others is their concern. They show great concern concerning the Book of Allah. How? Through their memorization, through their recitation, and through their explanation of the Book of Allah. And likewise, they show great concern toward the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ by their recognition of his Sunnah, and by their understanding, and likewise by their distinguishing and identifying that's truly from his al-Sahih, or confirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ, and that which is unconfirmed from the Prophet upon the Prophet ﷺ. This is their first characteristic, that they, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, show great concern with the Book of Allah. How? They memorize the Book of Allah, and they recite the Book of Allah, and likewise they explain the Book of Allah. And also concerning the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in the sense that they are aware of his Sunnah, they are not ignorant of what was his Sunnah, and likewise in the sense that they are concerned in understanding the fiqh, or the understanding of his words and his actions. What did they mean? Not just knowing his words and his actions, but what do these words and actions mean? And likewise in distinguishing those words and actions which have been attributed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which are confirmed upon him, and those words and actions which have been attributed to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and which are unconfirmed upon him. And you can see this very clearly in the historical review of the people of the Sunnah. If you look at the areas of the Quran, we find that every single commentator of the Quran who is known and is considered his commentary to be a true expression of the intent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were all scholars of the Sunnah. First and foremost, of course, was Ibn Jarir al-Tabari. Afterwards, Ibn Kathir. And likewise, of course, the Salaf, all of them were men of the Sunnah, who they took and quote in their books of tafsir, like Mujahid and others. Likewise, the reciters of the Quran, those 10 men who are known for the recitation of the Quran, the 10 reciters of the Quran, they were all scholars of the Sunnah, in the sense they were all people from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Not scholars of the Sunnah, but they were all people of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We do not take one of the recitations, we do not have anybody who is known from the 10 reciters of the Quran to have been identified as a person of bid'ah, to have identified as being adhering to a sect other than Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, a group other than Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Likewise, the scholars of Hadith, we do not find, in terms of distinguished and the weak Hadith, any scholar who is historically known, usually from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Sufi who was from the 6 compilations like Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, and Nasa'i, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, none of them were known to have adhered to either Shi'ism or Sufism, or neither of them were known to be Qadaris or Jahmis or any of the different sects, but rather they were all known to be from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the reason why is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us in the Quran in many passages to adhere to the Quran and to recite it, among which is the verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابِ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ أُولَٰئِكَ يُؤْمِنُونَ بِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse that those who were given the book, the scripture, they recite it as it is supposed to be recited. These are those who truly believe in the book. And over here, recitation does not only mean that in the sense that they recite the Quran according to the rules of tajweed, but as the Salaf have explained, means that they follow the rules and regulations of the Quran. They follow what is halal in the Quran and they consider that to be halal. They want to be haram and they consider that to be haram. The beliefs they take from the Quran. Their sharia they take from the Quran. They judge between themselves in their disputes from the Quran. So therefore, we find that they have a great emphasis toward the Quran. And you will not find any book of hadith except you will find in it a chapter which mentions the virtues of certain surah in the Quran. For instance, that Surah Al-Ikhlas equals a third of the Quran, or that Ayat al-Kursi is the greatest verse in the Quran, or that Surah Al-Fatiha is the greatest surah in the Quran. You find all these narrations of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ which encourage that which we find in the Quran in terms of concern with the Quran. And therefore the first characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they are concerned with the Quran, not only in that the sense that they try to recite the Quran as it is revealed according to the rules of tajweed, but also in the sense that they and also in the sense that they explain the Quran methodology. That known methodology is that, as I'm sure you all know, is that the Quran is to be explained by the Quran, and then by the Sunnah, and then by the statements of the Prophet's companions, and then the statements of their successors, the Tabi'een, and that as far as using sheer opinion, it is forbidden. For the Prophet ﷺ has said in some narrations that whoever speaks about the Quran without knowledge, then let him take his seat in the hellfire. So the intent here is that this is the first characteristic of the people of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And therefore we should, each one of us, is look at himself. How much of the Quran have we memorized? And how much have we tried to spend our efforts in learning the tajweed of the Quran and in trying to pronounce the Arabic as it should be pronounced, so that when we recite the Quran it carries the Arabic sounds to it and not non-Arabic sounds to it. And how much effort have we spent in trying to understand the Quran, and so that when we recite the verses that we have memorized, or that when we read on from the Mus'haf, from the scripture, even though we might have not memorized these verses, we understand what we're reading. And the way of the companions is well known to you, I'm sure, that they used to take 10 verses from the Quran and they would memorize that which is in the Quran and those 10 verses from knowledge and action, and then they would proceed to the next 10 verses. And that's why they have been described by some contemporary writers, among whom Sayyid Qutb, as the unique Quranic generation, because they had this approach to the Quran. They would take only 10 verses. They would not just memorize the Quran and then not understand that which they memorized, or recite the Quran in a beautiful voice but yet not apply the teachings of the Quran. Yet they would gather between knowledge and action, between memorization and recitation. So this was their first characteristic. And it is very important for us as young men and women that we spend much time with the Quran as possible, especially in a country where the majority of the people are non-Muslims. Every one of us should have a daily period with the Quran. I mean, even if that period of time is very short, there's only a few verses that he can read, but he should always be in touch with the Book of Allah, for this is the basis of our religion. And as the Prophet ﷺ described, that on the Day of Judgment people will raise their degrees in paradise upon the ability of how much Quran they have recited. The second characteristic is that of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that the people of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah are concerned, they show great concern toward the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. How? In the sense that they try to understand the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They try to know what was his guidance when waking up. Try to know what was his guidance when he went to sleep. What was his guidance when he went to relieve himself. What was the guidance when he ate or when he drank. What was his guidance when he prayed. What was his guidance when he made hajj. What was his guidance when he fasted the month of Ramadan. And so forth. All these matters of guidance. And we find that there are many books which express the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which are available to us in the English language, that we can benefit from, so that we may know the characteristics of the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The people who are not from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, they are ignorant of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prayed. They are ignorant of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam fasted. They are ignorant of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made hajj. They are ignorant of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in his personal behavior. And therefore, they are forbidden from the great rewards of adhering to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's way. Now, it is important not just to know the Sunnah in the sense of memorizing the hadith or knowing the words of the Prophet ﷺ, but also to understand the fiqh of the Sunnah. And this is something which is great and noble indeed, because we know that classically the scholars of the hadith were two groups. Those scholars of hadith who memorized the words of the Prophet ﷺ and were known for their preserving the Sunnah. And then there were those who were able to deduce from the Sunnah its rulings and its knowledge in it. And this is to what the Prophet ﷺ said, that perhaps a person who's carrying knowledge is not a faqih. He doesn't understand what he is, comprehends what he is carrying. And perhaps he will then give it to somebody who is a faqih, who's understanding or can derive those points from the Sunnah. Likewise, their recognition of the Sunnah and their knowledge of the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ and the fiqh of the Sunnah also is that they have a recognition of what is affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ and what is not affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ. Many hadith, however, these hadith will not be applied upon the Prophet ﷺ, or they somehow fall into the warning of the Prophet ﷺ who warned against lying against him. When a person is not concerned whether the hadith he reports is authentic or not, one fears he might fall under the great warning of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in which he said that whoever lies against me willfully, let him take his seat in the hellfire. من كذب علي متعمدا فليتبوأ مقعده من النار. أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. So the point is that this recognition of what is affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ and what is not affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ is also one of the concerns of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And by Allah's grace and mercy, that we live in a time in which the knowledge of what is affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ and what is not affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ is very easy for us. For those brothers, especially those brothers who can read Arabic and who are engaged in da'wah amongst their peers, those brothers and sisters, it is very useful that they have some important text, mention the Sahih Hadith and distinguish the Sahih from the Hadith of the works of Shaykh al-Albani in particular. Because by Allah's mercy, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has raised him in this century that we may benefit from his works of hadith, and that they're printed in such a way and are so widespread that you can look at any book like Sahih al-Jami' al-Saghir or Da'if al-Jami' al-Saghir and you can quickly find a hadith if it's Sahih or if it's not. If you try to use the works of the earlier scholars like Ibn Hajar or al-Zahabi or other scholars, it's very difficult sometimes to find a ruling upon a hadith, because you will find their statements within the volumes of the works that they have written. I mean, for instance, now, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani was a greater scholar of hadith than Shaykh al-Albani, without doubt. However, though, if you want to now try to gather his statements concerning grading hadith, you will find this within the chapters and within the pages of Fath al-Bari, which is very difficult then therefore to know concerning a specific hadith, where did he speak about it in those 12 or 13 volumes. But if you have some of these reference books, especially those works by Shaykh al-Albani, it's very easy for you to find a hadith quickly and know, is this hadith that I want to use in a khutbah, or is this hadith I want to use in a lecture? Is it affirmed upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or is it weak, not affirmed upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? The point is that the first characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they are concerned with the Book of Allah in terms of the memorization and the tajweed, the recitation of the Quran properly according to the rules of tajweed, and likewise also in the understanding of the Book of Allah. And the second characteristic of them is that they are, or this is part of the first characteristic, that they are concerned with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in knowing the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and in knowing the understanding of this guidance, the fiqh of this guidance, and likewise in distinguishing between correct and weak hadith. And this is a good indication for you if you would like to know if a person is truly a scholar from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah or not, by seeing how much knowledge does he have of the Book of Allah, and how much has he memorized of the Book of Allah, and likewise how much knowledge does he have of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and likewise how much understanding does he have between weak and false hadith. The more a person has, the greater he is in his scholarship of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, and the less that he has, the weaker he is in the latter of that. The second characteristic we might mention is that they follow knowledge with action. For as you know, to have knowledge of the Book of Allah, or to have knowledge of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, without acting upon it will be a punishment for a person on the Day of Judgment. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemns and censures the Jews in the Quran for them commanding people to do righteousness, which means to obey Allah and obey their Sharia, the Torah, and yet forgetting themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do you command mankind into righteousness, meaning obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and obeying their Sharia, the Torah, and yet you forget yourselves. You forget to apply those commands which you are giving to the people. And at the same time you recite the book. Do you not think? In other words, this type of characteristic is of the people who have no thinking, because they have benefited the people, but yet they have harmed themselves. And likewise, this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has described them in the Quran as donkeys, just carrying upon their back a lot of volumes, in the sense that even though they have this knowledge which they have placed upon their back, and this responsibility, this burden, yet it hasn't affected them. And so they're much like donkeys, in the sense that they cannot know the true path from the path of falsehood. And the Prophet ﷺ used to say in a hadith reported by Zayd bin Arqam, and reported by Muslim and Tirmidhi and others, that he would say, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa'. Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from a knowledge which does not benefit. What is this knowledge that does not benefit? Well, it's two types. A knowledge that does not benefit, concerning what we're talking about, is that knowledge that you have of the Book of Allah, and that knowledge that you have of the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and yet you do not apply. That's a non-beneficial knowledge. It's harm to you on the Day of Judgment. The second characteristic is knowledge of matters that have no benefit, neither in religious affairs or in worldly affairs. Like knowledge of classically the scholars would describe, like knowledge of many lines of poetry, for instance. Okay? To know a lot of poetry, while it is a praiseworthy characteristic in terms of for those who are to be scholarly in the Arabic language and to are trying to understand the Quran and the Sunnah and understand the language as it was spoken during the time of revelation, it's important that they know much of poetry. But the point is that type of poetry which does not benefit, and yet a person might have a lot of knowledge of just lines of poetry. Likewise, classical scholars would identify knowledge of the lineage of the different tribes. That, for instance, this tribe came from this tribe and it has 10 subsections to it, and this subsection had 4 subsections and so forth. While it is important in some cases, like in studies of hadith, in order to identify narrators one from the other, so that you know that, for instance, if somebody is called identified as Az-Zuhri, and another hadith is identified as could be the same person, because Az-Zuhri would be a subsection of the Quraysh tribe, for instance. In this case, it's beneficial knowledge. But just to have knowledge of just facts, just like some people do, they might know all the players of a certain football team and all their histories and so forth, memorizing these details. Liverpool's, or for instance, knowing just different facts. Like sometimes people memorize just facts, that have no benefit neither in worldly pursuits nor has any benefit in religious pursuits. This is all part of the knowledge which is not useful that the Prophet ﷺ forbade us from. So when he used to make this dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa', from a knowledge which does not, I seek refuge with you from a knowledge which does not benefit, it is meant two things as identified by scholars. The first thing that knowledge which does not, which lacks some usefulness and sometimes extended, so that is sometimes that knowledge which is not a Sharia knowledge, but it has no benefit neither in worldly matters nor in religious matters. And likewise the hadith continues, وَمِنْ قَلْبٍ لَا يَخْشَى, and from a heart that does not have fear, khushu'. Because, and this shows the importance of knowledge and action, because when a person is knowledgeable, it should have results in fear in his heart of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Did not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say that those who fear Him are the scholars? إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاءُ, that those from His servants who fear Him are the scholars. So therefore He would tie these two matters together, the Prophet ﷺ, because they have a strong relationship to them, that when one has knowledge, it should result in fear. And then He said, وَمِن نَفْسٍ لَا تَشْبَعُ, and from a soul which is never satisfied. And this is something which is very important, that a person has to train himself, that he must learn to be satisfied with his necessary 5 points, which I'd like to stress for a few minutes. We are only in this world for a period of time. It's said in a hadith, what am I in the world? Except for like a person who is traveling and stopped under a shade, a tree, under rest for a few moments, and then continued on his traveling. And like such, our position, us from Ahlus Sunnah should be to this world. Those people who have an insatiable hunger for possessions and so forth, and they are never satisfied, in the sense that they must have, like their meals, they must not have one type of meal, but they must have 50 types of meals and so forth. Or in the sense that their clothes, that they must have every single type of garment that appears in the market, they must get that. Or gadgets and so forth, they must have all these matters, and they're never satisfied. This is a characteristic of a person who hasn't restrained his soul. And therefore, one of the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah we'll see is that they were known as having zuhd. Zuhd, okay? Zuhd means that have a foregoing of the pleasures of the world. And zuhd is two types. Zuhd from, in the sense that you stay away from those things which Allah has forbidden, this is required. And also a zuhd from having too much indulgence into the world. You need to take from the world that which gets you by. And what is extra, if it's not going to assist you in the obedience of Allah, then it's something which is not beneficial to you. But what we receive in this world from blessings from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should only be in that which is going to be used for the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we are, I'm sure many of us are aware of the hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ad-dunya mal'unatun," that this world is cursed, except for what? Remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what follows that? A scholar and somebody learning. So the world is cursed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and in fact the Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith that had the world with all its blessings and its glitters and all its riches and its treasures equaled in Allah's sight to the weight of a wing of a fly, the disbeliever would have not had a single drink in this world. I mean, the reason why such luxuries and so forth, because the world has no meaning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, significance in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them this world and gives them much in this world and allows them to enjoy. Had the world had significance with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the equal to the wing of a fly, and what is the significance of the wing of a fly? It's no significance whatsoever. Then, as the Prophet ﷺ explained to us, the disbeliever would not have even had a drink of water in this world. Allah would have not allowed him to have a drink of water in this world. So the point is that going on with this hadith was that the Prophet ﷺ then sought refuge from a soul which never is satisfied. Okay, it always wants more and more. And especially in a world, very materialistic world like we live now today, one has to be spend much time and concern in bridling the passions of his soul and in trying to always hold himself back from too much indulgence in worldly pleasures. And the fourth thing the Prophet ﷺ said in this hadith, وَمِن دَعْوَ لَا يُسْتَجَابَ لَهَا, and from a prayer which is not answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when is a prayer not going to be answered by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? When the person is not eating from halal, or drinking, or wearing clothes from a halal means, from lawful means. Many of you might be aware of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said that perhaps a man will be going out on a journey, ash'ath aghbar, in the sense that his hair will be disheveled and also he'll be dusty because it's a journey. And this journey is a journey in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either it's to Hajj or Umrah, either it's jihad in the path of Allah, either it is to seek knowledge for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And yet he raises his hands in prayer. I mean, in the sense that he has put much effort and exerted himself, and that's why his hair is disheveled, and that's why he's dusty. However, his food is haram, his clothes are haram, his drink is haram. So when the Prophet ﷺ said, how would Allah respond to his dua? How would Allah respond to his prayer? So likewise, so you can see that in this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he said, "Oh Allah, I seek refuge with you from a knowledge that does not benefit, and from a heart that does not fear, and from a soul that is not, and from a prayer which is not answered," how all these matters are, when I was mentioning earlier, not just knowing the Sunnah, in the sense of knowing these words, but understanding the fiqh of the Sunnah, and seeing what the relationship between these four statements are. The knowledge is unbeneficial because it's not put into action. So therefore the heart does not fear. And therefore, since it's not put into action, the person follows his passions and his desires, and so he's not satisfied, and therefore his prayers are not answered because he just wants to feed himself and to drink and to wear clothes, whether it comes from a halal means or not. The other statement of the Prophet ﷺ, which is in this same topic, is that the Prophet ﷺ said that a man will be brought on the day of judgment, the day of resurrection, and he will be thrown in the hellfire, and he will drag his intestines, his bowels. He will drag them around the hellfire, and he will go around the hellfire like a donkey. Perhaps some of you have seen maybe some programs or some pictures, like a donkey, when he goes around the well and moves like that. So the people of the hellfire will be surprised, and then they will say to him, "Oh, but so, did you not used to command us in ma'ruf?" Ma'ruf is whatever, or common sense orders, and forbid us from al-munkar. And munkar is whatever the Sharia forbids or common sense forbids. And he said, "Yes, I used to command you in ma'ruf, in that which the Sharia or common sense orders, but however I would not do it myself. And I used to forbid you from al-munkar, that which the Sharia forbids or common sense forbids, and yet at the same time I would do those forbidden things that I would tell you not to." And so this hadith, which is in Bukhari and Muslim, shows us how that when knowledge is not followed by action, therefore it comes as a punishment to the person on the day of judgment. And likewise upon Anas ibn Malik, that he heard the Prophet ﷺ, that he said during the night of Isra, the night in which he was taken to the heavens, he came about a people who were their tongues were being sheared by claws of fire. And he said to Jibreel, "Who are these people?" The Prophet ﷺ said, "They are the khutaba of your ummah, talks, or give lectures." It doesn't just mean the Jum'ah khatib, but it also means anybody gives a talk, or they say what they do not do themselves. And in another narration, they read the book of Allah, they recite it, but at the same time they do not act upon it. And likewise, the Prophet ﷺ told us another hadith of Abi Barza al-Aslami, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "لا تزول قدم عبد يوم القيامة حتى يسأل عن أربع." The Prophet ﷺ said that the 2 feet of a slave, of mankind it means, will not move on the day of judgment. It means he will not go to either paradise or hellfire until he's asked 4 matters. The first matter is his life, how did he spend it? And the second matter is his youth, how did he spend it? And his third matter was the money which he received. How did he gain this money, his wealth, and how did he spend it? And the fourth matter is what? Knowledge. Did he act upon it? And this hadith is by Tirmidhi and others. Yeah. Let me give you a few. So the final hadith is upon Jundub bin Abdullah al-Azdi radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet ﷺ said, struck a similitude. He said the similitude of the person who learns knowledge and yet forgets himself. He learns knowledge and yet forgets himself is like that of a siraj, which is a lamp or a torch. It burns itself, even though at the same time it gives light for the people. You know that any sort of especially in the old days when you would have a torch or you would have a lamp, the fuel, right? Even though people would benefit from that fuel, it gets consumed, right? I mean, perhaps maybe you have not seen a lamp or a torch, but you see a candle, for instance, right? I mean, the candle, when you light a candle, there's no electricity. The candle gives you light, so you benefit from it, right? But at the same time, the candle itself melts, and therefore burns itself until it doesn't exist. So, this is the similitude which the Prophet ﷺ struck for the person who teaches people good and forgets himself. Yes, the people benefit from him, and they learn knowledge, but yet at the same time he burns himself, in the sense that he'll be punished for that. So the point here is that the second characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they follow their knowledge with action. They follow their knowledge with action. They are concerned with Allah, we said, and writes it properly, and they understand its meanings. They are concerned with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, since they can identify the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in different those people who have done that Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Now obviously Ahmad ibn Hanbal in this matter was discussing those matters which are non-obligatory in Sharia. Those matters which are obligatory in the Sharia from the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah, because we know the Prophet ﷺ Sunnah is two types. That which is obligatory, that we must do, and that which is not obligatory, that it's recommended to do. So an obligatory Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, meaning something that is not been mentioned in the Quran, is growing like one's beard, for instance, right? This is not mentioned in the Quran, but it's obligatory. So this is something that you have to continue doing. I mean, you can't just say, grow your beard once in your life and shave it and so forth. But what Ahmad ibn Hanbal meant was that those qualities of the Sunnah, which a person might come across, and are not obligatory upon him to do, but at least do it once in your life, so that you'll be for those people who apply that of hadith, the charity. It's like if you gain money, you have to give charity. So likewise, if you by acting upon it, even once in your life. And Ahmad ibn Hanbal was described as saying, I came across a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ either made Hajj or Umrah, and he then did some blood cupping. And blood cupping means to remove some blood from the head as a way of medicine practiced inside the Prophet ﷺ. And he gave the person who did that a fourth of a dinar. So I went to Mecca, and he either made Hajj or Umrah, I forget now. And I also did blood cupping, and I gave the person a fourth of a dinar. Such Imam Ahmad spoke. Why? To show the people that this is the way you apply the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, even once in your life, if you can do it. And therefore you will not be, inshallah ta'ala, from those who speak or learn and do not then apply that knowledge. The second characteristic, the third characteristic, of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, is that they believe in all the book, all the scripture. And this, I mean by scripture, and book means the revelation in its totality, and fully. So therefore, as an example, they believe in those verses that mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes. Just like they accept those verses that say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not resemble His creation. And likewise, those refer to Allah's promise, and those verses which refer to Allah's punishment. And likewise, they gather between qadr, belief in qadr, and likewise that they affirm to the slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he has a will and a choice and an action of his own. And likewise, they gather between knowledge and worship, as I mentioned, and between strength and mercy, and between acting and taking the causes which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made for the natural causes which He has made for the world, and also at the same time zuhd, in the sense that they're not over-engaged with the world. This is the third characteristic. So, and this is something which is very important, that they believe in all the scriptures, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala censures the Jews, and He says, أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. Do you believe in some of the book and disbelieve in other part of the scripture? In the sense that you only take those verses which are for you and you apply, and those verses which stand against you, you disregard. What was the characteristic of those different sects? As I explained in the commentary, that for instance, when we look at those people who denied Allah's attributes, they only took those verses that said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not resemble His creation. لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. That there's nothing which resembles Him, or there's nothing which is equal than Him. And yet they didn't pay attention to those verses which affirm His names and His attributes. Because just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, He then says, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. There's nothing like Him. Then He says, and yet at the same time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Himself that He sees, and He hears and sees all things. So this was one of the characteristics. They just took some verses and out of context, and they left the other verses. And likewise in the question of faith, we find that the Khawarij took sins to be equal to disbelief. and they were concerned with those verses and mentioned Allah's punishment, and they forgot the verses which meant Allah's mercy, that He forgives all sins except for the sin of shirk, and He forgives any other sin to whomever He pleases. And likewise the on the day took those verses that mentioned Allah's mercy, those verses that mentioned Allah's wrath and His punishment. So therefore they would say that faith is unimpaired, is not harmed by sin, and that a person, no matter how sinful he is, his faith is perfect, his iman is complete, as explained in Al-Aqid al-Wasatiyah. And likewise, we find another example concerning those people concerning the subject of Qadr. We find that the Qadariyah affirm, in their willingness to affirm that every single person has a free choice and a free will, and he has an own action which he does of his own accord. They negated Allah's Qadr, that one only wills what Allah wills for him, and that the actions are all created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And on the other hand, we have the Jabriya, who in trying to affirm Allah's Qadr went to an extreme, and they denied that a person has a will and a person does an action of his own accord. Likewise, in terms of one's behavior, entering into the religion fully, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu idkhulu fi as-silmi kaffa. O you who believe, enter as-silm, and al-istislam, it means to submit. Other Muslims have said it means Islam. Enter into Islam fully. Not enter into Islam partially, just taking of Islam what you want and discarding of Islam what you want. So therefore we find that the way of Ahlus Sunnah is that they gather between knowledge and worship. I mean, they are known not just only as people who have a lot of knowledge, you know what I'm saying, but they're also known as people of worship. This is a very sad characteristic we find sometimes among many youth who adhere to the Salafi ways, that they'll be known, for instance, amongst the people that they are very knowledgeable brothers, but they're not known for their worship amongst the people. And they're not known for their fasting or their engaging in worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they're only known for their knowledge. This is not the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. The way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they gather between knowledge and worship. And likewise, between strength and mercy. In the sense that they are strong and harsh upon the truth, and harsh against the disbelievers, but at the same time they have another facet to their qualities. And they're merciful toward the creation. And they're not overbearing upon the creation, as we'll explain in greater detail. They, at the same time, even though they might, as we'll explain, for the hate and despise and innovation, mercy towards that person, because they are worried about his fate, that he's upon that innovation. And even though they might be harsh against the disbelievers, in the sense they're willing to wage jihad against them if there was a jihad, and to kill them, at the same time they're worried that if these people die upon disbelief, they'll be in the hellfire. So they gather between qualities of strength and qualities of mercy. And likewise, they seek the causes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made in this world, and at the same time they're not over concerned with this world. So they act, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we know, has led to causes in different things. He has made that, for instance, that success in your academic pursuits means what? A lot of studying, right? And at the same time, for instance, good health, right, means that you have a balanced diet and you do exercise, for instance. And so these are different causes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made, just different laws in the universe. So the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they take these causes and they apply them in order to further the religion and to strengthen the affairs of the Muslims. But at the same time, they're not over concerned with the worldly matters. All worldly causes. And they have, therefore, they're forgetful of the hereafter. Many Muslims today, you will find, they'll say, especially those who are influenced by modernistic trends in Islam, they will say that, well, the way for the Muslims is that they need to have doctors and scientists and physicists, and they need biologists, and they need all these, knowledges of the worldly matter. This is true. This is without doubt. These are all from the what is known as al-Fard al-Kifaya, that which is an obligation for the community as a whole. In order for Islam to be strong, we need people who are doctors, who are scientists, who are of all these different pursuits. But at the same time, the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they're balanced. In the sense that they take these matters, and at the same time they have zuhd. That they're not over concerned with these matters. In the sense that these matters make them forget the hereafter, and forget the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They become engrossed in these issues. So, the point is that this third characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, because we said that they have knowledge, and we explained that knowledge in the sense of their concern with the Book of Allah, and concern with the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they act upon this knowledge, so therefore they believe in all the revelation, all the book, the scripture, and they enter into the religion fully. So you see how these three matters are connected, inshallah ta'ala. Their knowledge and their action lead them to believing in all of the book, and lead them into entering into the religion fully. Those different groups which have strayed from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah have either because they have not believed in all the scripture, they have rejected parts of the scripture, either in great parts or small parts, or because they haven't entered into religion fully. They have not adhered to Islam as they are supposed to. So that is the third characteristic. Now, the fourth characteristic is that they have al-ittiba' and they leave al-ibtida'. Ittiba' means adherence, and in this sense adherence to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And al-ibtida' means innovation. As you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, in more than 30 passages of the Quran, commanded us to follow the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, has commanded us to obey the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, has commanded us to judge our disputes to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed He has made a criterion to distinguish mankind, do they love Allah or not, through their following of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. قُلْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تُحِبُّونَ اللَّهَ فَاتَّبِعُونِي يُحْبِبْكُمُ اللَّهُ. Say to mankind, O Muhammad ﷺ, that if you love Allah as you claim, then follow me. Allah will love you and forgive you your sin. And likewise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, قُلْ أَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولِ. Say to them, O Muhammad ﷺ, obey Allah and the Messenger. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. That if you differ in anything, refer it back to Allah and the Messenger. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلْيَحْذَرَ الَّذِينَ يُخَالِفُونَ عَنْ أَمْرِهِ أَن تُصِيبُهُمْ فِتْنَةٌ أَوْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ. That let them beware those who go against His command, that a fitna, which is disbelief, will occur to them, or a great punishment in this world or in the hereafter, meaning that they disobey the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So we find more than 30 passages in the Quran in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to adhere to the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And likewise we find also that the Prophet ﷺ said in many narrations for us to obey him. He said in a hadith of Abu Hurairah, reported by Bukhari and others, that all of his ummah will enter into the paradise except for those who refuse. كل أمتي يدخلون الجنة إلا من أبى. All of my ummah, my community, will enter into paradise except for those who refuse. The companions were shocked at this, because you know that in the hereafter it was either paradise or the hellfire. So who would refuse to go to paradise? In other words, choose to go to hell. The Prophet said, "Man ata'ani dakhala al-jannah, wa man asani faqad aba." He who obeys me has entered into paradise, and he who refuses to obey me has, he who disobeys me has refused to go to paradise. So therefore, their fourth characteristic is that they adhere to the way of the Prophet ﷺ. And they forsake ibtida'. Ibtida' means innovation. As the Prophet ﷺ said, that every bid'ah is a dalala. Every bid'ah, every innovation is a straying from the straight path. And every straying of the straight path leads to the hellfire. And the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Aisha, Bukhari and Muslim, مَنْ عَمِلَ عَمَلًا لَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْرُنَا فَهُوَ رَدٌّ. That he who does an action which is not upon our matter, it is rejected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It means it's not accepted by Him. So, the Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, they have the knowledge, they have the action, they believe in all of the scripture, all the revelation, they enter into the religion fully, but in these matters they are doing it according to the way of the Prophet ﷺ, not innovating a way of their own. Whether that innovation deals with the beliefs, which is the most dangerous, whether that innovation deals with acts of worship and the way we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether that innovation deals in the way of da'wah, or in the way of reviving this ummah and bringing back its position which it belongs to, the Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, they adhere to the way of the Prophet ﷺ, and they forsake innovation. Likewise, the fifth matter is that they adhere to the way of the righteous Salaf, and those who have traveled upon their path in knowledge, action, and da'wah. And they stay away from the path of those who go against their way, the way of the righteous Salaf. The word Salaf means whoever has preceded you, linguistically in the Arabic language. And opposite to this word, the antonym of this word is the word Khalaf, which means those who come after you. So everybody has a Salaf, meaning there are those people who preceded him, and everybody has a Khalaf, in the sense there are those people who come after him. But in the religious sense, in the Sharia sense, when we say the word Salaf, we mean whom? We mean those three generations that the Prophet ﷺ praised in this hadith of Imran ibn Hussein, which is in Bukhari and elsewhere, that he said, خَيْرُ النَّاسِ قَرْنِي. The best of mankind is my generation. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يُلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يُلُونَهُمْ. Then those who came after them, then those who came after them. This is who we mean by the Salaf. That the fifth characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they adhere to the way of the scholars of the Salaf. the scholars of the Salaf, and also those people who followed their way throughout the centuries. Follow their way not just only in knowledge, but also in action and in da'wah. Because as you know, that the book and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is general, in the sense that people can interpret the Prophet ﷺ's sunnah in different ways. And therefore we need to have some sort of yardstick to understand, is this truly the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or is this the way of others, not the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ? And how has Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us to do this? He said in the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, that whoever splits from the way of the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولِ, whoever splits from the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, after guidance has come to him, in the sense that he does this after the truth has come to him, then he said, وَيَتَّبَعَ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, that he follows other than the believer's way. نُوَلِّهِ مَا تَوَلَّى, that we send him in the direction which he has chosen for him. وَنُصْلِهِ جَهَنَّمَ, and we also burn him in the hellfire. And what an evil end. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala didn't just say that those who split from the way of the Messenger ﷺ after knowledge has come to them, and they will be sent to the hellfire. He said, and they follow other than the believer's way. What is the way of the believers? It's explained in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ when he describes the saved group. He said, مَا أَنَا عَلَيْهِ وَأَصْحَابِي, those who are upon what I'm upon and my companions. Why did he put this condition of the companions, of their understanding? Because it is, if we understand Islam as they understood Islam, then we know how the Prophet ﷺ understood this religion. Because the Prophet ﷺ was their teacher. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, that he teaches them the book and the wisdom. So the teacher of Abu Bakr, the teacher of Umar, the teacher of Uthman, the teacher of Ali, the teacher of Aisha radiallahu anhum, and others from the Prophet's companions was whom? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. يُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, he teaches them the book and the wisdom. And so therefore, these scholars, for instance, of the Sahaba, they had students in the second generation. So this is the chain starts here. And then those scholars in the second generation, they had scholars in the third generation. And so forth throughout the centuries. So those scholars that appeared after those three generations, even though they're not from the Salaf in the strictest sense, in the sense that they did not live in those three generations, however they are known and recognized that they followed the way of the Salaf, then therefore we follow their way. And we stay away from those who go against their way, like the people of bid'ah, the people of innovation, who have chosen for themselves a way in Islam other than that of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and other than that of the Prophet's companions. However though, what do we mean by we stay away from those people who have taken a path other than the path of the Salaf? Entering into this is making hijrah from the Mubtada', in the sense that you stay away from the Mubtada'. Ibn Qudama, in his essay explaining the Sunnah, he says that it's from the Sunnah to make hijrah from the people of bid'ah and to stay far away from them, and to leave argumentation in matters of the religion, and not to look at their books. In other words, one does not read their books or listen to their words, and that any introduction to the religion of Islam is a bid'ah. However though, one should understand that this forsaking of the people of bid'ah has certain conditions too, which sometimes brothers who want to adhere to the way of the Sunnah misunderstand. So we need to spend a few moments and understand these issues. That this is what is known from the Sharia as part of the punishments, the ta'zirat, which are used in order to bring these people back to the Sunnah. This is the aim behind it. I mean, for instance, when the Prophet ﷺ said concerning the Qadariyah, which is a sect which appeared at the end of the time of the Sahaba, they appeared during the time of Ibn Umar, because if you read in Sahih Muslim, the first hadith, two men come to Ibn Umar from Basra, and they said there are people who have appeared in Basra who follow knowledge, but yet they don't believe in Qadar. They say that Allah does not know of an event until it has occurred. Or as the hadith says, Al-Amr Unuf. Unuf means that Allah does not know that something's going to occur until it has occurred. This is a great bid'ah. In fact, it's disbelief. And then Ibn Umar says, tell them that I have nothing to do with them. And that if they were to spend as much as Uhud in gold, I would not be accepted from them, because their belief is kufr in reality. And then he mentioned the hadith of his father Umar, that the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with his companions, and that Jibreel came to him in the form of a Bedouin Arab and said to him, what is Islam, what is Iman, and what is Ihsan? And the important point of the hadith is that he mentions that from Iman is to believe in Qadr. That's why Ibn Umar mentioned this hadith. So this sect which appeared at the end of the time of the Prophet's companions, the Prophet ﷺ foretold his companions their appearance. And he said that the Qadariyah are the Majus of this ummah, that they are the Magians of this ummah. The Majus were a religion that was in Persia, and still have some followers in the world today, known usually as Zoroastrians, who believe that there were two creators of the world, a creator of good and a creator of evil. So these people who deny Qadr have also, in one way, have resembled them in the sense that they say that man creates his own actions. They do not believe that Allah creates the actions of man, as we explained in the lectures about Aqidah. Now the point is, what did the Prophet ﷺ said? That if they die, if they're sick, do not visit them. And if they die, do not pray janazah upon them. What was the intent behind this? The intent behind this was that those people who appeared amongst the Salaf with these type of ideas would feel that they are outcasts because of that sinfulness or because of that bid'ah in the religion. And likewise, that's why you find the Salaf used to say that if they used to see a person of bid'ah come to them, they would go take another path. Or they would say, I'd like to have, if a person of bid'ah would come to them and say, I'd like to have a word with you, they would say, not even a half a word. So this is how they used to act. They had very much strictness. However though, this strictness is, and this is the important point which I want everybody to pay attention to very carefully, that this strictness is only when the benefits of making hijrah from the mubtada are apparent. In other words, in the sense that when you make hijrah from the mubtada, from the innovator, he feels that his action, that he's come out of the group and so forth, and therefore it will result in his repentance and coming back to the sunnah. But when the majority of the people in your society are unaware of Islam, or unaware of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, then one cannot make hijrah of the mubtadi'in. One cannot make hijrah of the mubtadi'in. Why? Because what it means then, that these people will never learn the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the condition, that one has to weigh in the balance of Sharia, that by making hijrah from them, will it result in more good or more harm? So when the people, like now, are ignorant of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and especially in a country in which the people are non-Muslims in the first place, and the people who are Muslims know very little about the Islamic religion, to apply this quality of the Salaf in terms of distancing oneself from the general folk of the Muslims is not permissible in this case. Why? Because the aim behind the Sharia was what? To make these people feel that by their actions like this, they will feel that they're in the minority and they've done something wrong and so forth. Just like, for instance, you might say something, inshallah, sisters don't get angry. That if your wife does something that makes you angry in the house and you don't speak to her for a few moments and stuff like that, she'll feel that by that action she's caused your displeasure, and therefore that will result from her to turn back from her ways. Or sometimes the father with his children. He sometimes, if one of his children, his sons or daughters, does something which is displeasing to him, or the mother, to displease the mother, he sometimes will just show a little distance from himself. So the child will realize, oh, this is something really bad that I did, and then will, apologize and come back and listen to his parents in that matter. So this is the aim of this ruling in the Sharia, of staying away from the mubtada. It is part of the Sunnah, and we have to believe that in our heart. But it is applied only when a benefit is going to result in it. That the people will then feel that by him staying away from the Sunnah, he's the minority. But when the people in their overwhelming majority are non-Muslims, or when the people in their overwhelming majority are not following the Sunnah because they are ignorant of the Sunnah in the first place, and nobody has come to teach them then it's not permissible for us to distance ourselves from the people. We must be with the people and encourage them and teach them. However though, what did Ibn Qudamah say? That he said the way from the Sunnah is that they make hijrah from the people of bid'ah, and also that they do not debate in the religion, and they do not investigate the books of the people of bid'ah, or listen to their words. So he mentioned 4 things. Physically removing oneself from them, not arguing, not reading their books, and not listening to their speeches. These 3 matters we have to apply at all times. In the sense that we do not debate. Imam Ahmed was one time asked, I am with a people, the man asked Imam Ahmed, I am with a people who do not apply the Sunnah, and I am a man of the Sunnah, the only one. Shall I debate with them concerning the Sunnah, concerning this matter? Imam Ahmed said, no, don't debate with them, just tell them the Sunnah. The man said, well, I'd like to debate with them concerning the Sunnah. Imam Ahmed said, I just think you're a man who likes to argue. Why? Because the idea is not to get into debates with the people. The idea is to teach the people. And teaching the people means to inform them and to enlighten them. But as far as debating, this is only done by those people who are knowledgeable, like scholars and students of knowledge, only when there is a benefit in that people are confused concerning this bid'ah. Is it people consider it to be part of the religion, so they want to expose its falsity. But as far as our characteristic, that us as young men and young women, that we become argumentative with the people. And instead of calling them in the nicest ways, we do it in the sense of being argumentative with the people. This is not the characteristic. The third thing is that we do not read their books. Under any circumstance, no young man or lady should read the books of the people of bid'ah. This is something to be done for the scholars, for them to, and students of knowledge who have reached a certain level of knowledge, that they will read their books and read their pamphlets and so forth in order to know about this so they can warn the Muslims. But for us, it is sufficient that we read their works and we listen to their. We do not each have to be independent researchers and pick up their books and so forth. And the fourth thing is listening to their speeches, to their talks. One does not go and participate in their gatherings and so forth and listen to their speeches, because as the Salaf used to say, one does not know his own heart. Perhaps he might hear a word of theirs, which might fall in his heart, he might think it's good, and then he will leave what he was upon from the Sunnah. So one has to seek a balance therefore in this matter. When we're talking about making hijrah from the people of bid'ah. What is that balance? The balance is that staying away from the people of bid'ah is four things. Physically separating oneself from them, that's one matter. Not being debateful and argumentative in the religion, that's second matter. Third matter is not looking at their books. Fourth matter is not listening to their words. As far as the first matter, that only comes during the time when there is a benefit in the Sharia to stay away from them. But when the majority of the people are not upon bid'ah, and they are ignorant, a majority of the people are upon bid'ah, or they are ignorant of Islam, then those brothers and sisters who have knowledge must try to come around these people and so forth in order to encourage them and to teach them. But at the same time, one is not argumentative, you see, and one does not read their books or he listens to their words. And this is the balance that we must see. Now, at the same time, I'd like to meet those new brothers, for instance, who are just being introduced to the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, or those new sisters who are and they don't have much knowledge and so forth. In this case, it's better for them to stay away from the people of bid'ah, because since their knowledge is not mature and their personalities have not matured, they might therefore get very confused. But what I meant is that the older brothers who have some understanding, it's very important that the people benefit from them. If you prevent the people from reaching out to you and from learning from you, who's going to teach the people? Who will the people benefit from? So one must seek a balance from this, and this is something which is well known. And if anybody has any doubts concerning this, just read volume 27 of Ibn Taymiyyah's Fatwa concerning the Hijr of the Mubtadi', or an essay written by Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd concerning the Hijr of the Mubtadi', or some of the words of Sheikh Al-Albani on many of his cassettes. They're very clear that this is only a matter of the Sharia in which it's weighed the balances, placing the balance of Sharia, the benefits against the harms. And it's not as some brothers imagine that as soon as they see a person who has some deviation, they cut themselves from it, and therefore they become reclusive, and neither people benefit from them nor do they gain the blessings of guiding people and so forth. I remember one time I was reading a story of a great scholar of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah who lived just before us in the last century, in the early part of this century, the 1900s. Sheikh Al-Qasimi. He once had a student who was very harsh in Damascus against the people of bid'ah, in the sense that as soon as he found a person who had any deviation, he would just cut from that person off. So one time Sheikh Al-Qasimi brought him and said to him, he said, "Oh, so-and-so," his student, he said, had I taken the same attitude with you as you take with the people, you would have never been guided to the Sunnah. So the point is that had people not sat with us and taught us, we would have not been guided to the Sunnah either. So therefore, we might also show some sort of balance in our attitude concerning leaving the Mubtadi'in. The sixth characteristic of the ways of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they forsake and they leave any type of division or differences in matters of the religion. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Shara'a lakum min ad-dini," that it has been commanded to you, or it has been revealed to you, or it has been ordained upon you from the religion, that which we have commanded Noah, and that which we have given to you, and that which we have given to Ibrahim and to Musa and Isa. What is that? أَنْ أَقِيمُوا الدِّينَ وَلَا تَتَفَرَّقُوا فِيهِ. That you establish the religion and you do not divide into groups in that matter, in the religion. So this is the essence of the religion, that we establish it and we do not become divided. And that's why we're called Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We establish the Sunnah and we are the Jama'ah on it. We are not divided into groups. So this characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is very obvious. They are known as Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah because they are united upon the Sunnah, and they are united upon the guidance of the early scholars. And they're also united upon their imams, in the sense that they're political imams in an Islamic state, that they do not revolt against them like the Khawarij do, even if they are impious or even if they are tyrannical. This is why they were known as the Jama'ah. And unfortunately, many brothers take only half of the equation. They only take the Sunnah part and they forget the Jama'ah part. And so therefore, the importance of adhering to the Jama'ah and to be unified and to stress this is sometimes vague in our minds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala censures that those people who have divided their religions into groups, every group is pleased with what it has. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that those who have divided their religion into different groups, لَسْتَ مِنْهُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ, that you have nothing to do with them in any aspect. So this is the quality of the people of shirk. The quality of people of shirk is that they have divided in their religion into different sects. The Jews have 71 groups, the Christians have 72 groups. This is their quality. But the people of Tawheed, they are Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They are unified, and they are not into different groups and parties. And so this is the next, the sixth characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, is that they are unified and that they adhere. Unified upon what? What is their unity upon? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. Adhere to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of you. Not just come together upon, just for the sake of coming together, but upon the rope of Allah. So that they are unified therefore upon the Sharia. And they try to minimize any differences. And they reject any sort of sectarianism or any sort of differences in the religion. And this leads them to a seventh characteristic, which I will conclude the next 15 minutes with, that they are very diligent upon gathering the Muslims upon the truth and unifying their ranks upon Tawheed and Ittiba', upon worshipping Allah alone and following the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and keeping far away from the Muslims any cause which leads to their difference or leads to their arguments between them or sectarianism between them. And for this reason, that is why in the matters of the usul, which usul means like the matters of belief, they have no other name except for the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. They don't distinguish themselves from the people in the usul of the deen, in the beliefs of religion, with any other name or title except for the Sunnah and the Jama'ah. And likewise, they do not have wala and bara, allegiance or this avowal upon any link except for that of Islam and the Sunnah. We need to spend a few minutes and understand this issue very carefully. Because they reject all and spurn all forms of sectarianism and all forms of differences in the religion, at the same time when the Muslims are divided, this is something of Allah's qadr, as the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَنْ يَعْشْ مِنْكُمْ فَسَيَرَى اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا, that whoever lives amongst you will see much differences. He said this to his companions, meaning that those of his companions who would live long lives, they would see much differences occur between the Ummah. The Ummah would split. What about us who have come 15 centuries after the Prophet ﷺ and his companions? The differences will be even greater. So the fact that differences occur is from Allah's qadr. But Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, even though they spurn these differences in the sense that they do not fall into these different sects and they do not fall into these different groups, they strive to unify the Muslims. And they strive to gather the Muslims upon the truth and unify their ranks upon Tawheed and Ittiba'. So whenever they find an issue which might be a cause of differences between the Muslims, they try to move that issue away from the Muslims. You see, they're always trying to lessen the differences between the Muslims. And likewise, this is why they do not distinguish themselves from the rest of the Muslims by any name except of that of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Because that's the original name. They're the people of the Sunnah, the religion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they're the Jama'ah. They have remained upon the Sunnah since they've inherited from the times of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So in the matters of the usul of the deen, usul of the deen means the matters of belief, like belief in Allah, belief in the last day, belief in Qadr, opposition towards the companions and so forth. They have no other name except for Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And likewise, they do not show wala, allegiance, or al-bara, which means to disavow oneself, upon any link except for the link of Islam and the link of the Sunnah, upon any cause. So therefore they have there's unknown amongst them matters of nationalism, or party allegiance, or differences of opinion, like differences in madhab. They do not make these issues of wala and bara. So that, for instance, if there are some people from them who are of a different race, or a person amongst them who is from a different locale and nationality in the world, or a person amongst them who is from has a different opinion concerning a matter of ijtihad, like some of the matters of the Sharia and so forth. They do not take these issues and raise them to an issue of wala and bara. The issue which they make wala and bara upon is that issue of Islam, in the sense they show wala to the Muslims, allegiance to the Muslims, and they make bara from bara'ah from the kuffar, from the disbelievers. And likewise in the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, since it's divided into 73 groups, they have allegiance to the sunnah and those who adhere to the sunnah, and they have disavowal from those who stay away from the sunnah. They do not take an issue of difference of opinion between their own ranks and make an issue of wala and bara. And let me give you an example, for instance. Ibn Uthaymeen, he relates a story concerning some people in West Africa. As you know, that Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayh, it was his practice, of course, that he used to pray with his hands on his chest, but then after he was flogged by the Abbasid governor of Medina, he was unable to raise his hands, okay? So he would pray with his hands down, which is known as a sajal in the Arabic language. And as a result, his companions, some of them took the method that this is the sunnah, to pray with one's hands down on his side. So the people in the method of Imam Malik historically, throughout the centuries, some of them have taken from his words and from the other hadith of Prophet, and they play with their hands upon their chest. And you find this, like, for instance, in the words of like Ibn Abdul Barr, who was a great Maliki scholar. Other Maliki scholars, like the author of Al-Mudawwana, say that the sunnah is to pray with one's hands down to the side. Because they saw Imam Malik doing this, and therefore they thought that this was the sunnah, unaware that he could not raise his hands because he was flogged. So, as a result, the people who adhere to the Maliki madhab in West Africa have two groups: those who place their hands on the chest, and those who place their hands on the side. So they came to Ibn Uthaymeen. Ibn Uthaymeen relates 1 year during Hajj, and each group called the other group a kafir for leaving this issue. Ibn Uthaymeen says often in the story that he was quite surprised about this, because this issue in the first place, according to one opinion of the scholars, is not an issue which is required or recommended. I think it's one of the recommended issues, placing one's hands on the chest. It's not an obligatory action, according to one opinion there. So therefore he said, how could you take an issue which is recommended and raise it to an issue of kufr and iman? So the point is that Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, even if they differ amongst themselves sometimes in ijtihad of certain matters, they do not make wala and bara upon these issues. They only make wala and bara upon the issue of Islam, in the sense the person is a Muslim or a kafir. Okay? And also upon the issue, is a person from Ahlus Sunnah or he's not from Ahlus Sunnah. But when there differences occur between the ranks of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah concerning matters of ijtihad, in which the person either has two rewards if he's correct in his ijtihad, or one reward if he's incorrect in his ijtihad, they follow the truth, of course. They don't follow that which is incorrect, the wrong ijtihad, but yet they do not raise this issue to an issue of wala and bara. So here we have a number of characteristics that they try to gather the Muslims upon the truth, and they unite their ranks upon tawheed and ittiba, and they keep away from the Muslims all causes which lead to the Muslims disagreeing and so forth. And likewise, for this reason, they do not distinguish themselves in matters of belief with any other name besides that of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, nor do they show wala and adawa or bara upon any issue except the issue of Islam or the issue of the Sunnah itself. This is those people who are from Ahl al-Bid'ah, who are outside the fold of Ahl Sunnah, or those people who are outside of the fold of Islam in totality. This is the seventh characteristic, and there's some more points that I'd like to mention concerning this, but we've drawn close to Salat now. So in review of what we mentioned, we said that I want these characteristics to be in your minds as a single whole and not separated as points. The first characteristic is what? That they were concerned with the Book of Allah. How? They would recite the Book of Allah, that they would memorize the Book of Allah, and that they would understand the meaning of the Book of Allah. And also they are concerned with the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, since they recognize his guidance, and also, it means they're aware of it, they're not ignorant. And likewise they understand the meanings of his words, and likewise they know which is affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ, which is sahih, and that which is not affirmed. They take this knowledge and they follow it with what? With action. This is their second characteristic. The third characteristic is that since they have knowledge and action, they believe in all the scripture, all the revelation, and likewise they enter into the religion fully, not partially. The fourth characteristic is that they, in these matters of believing and in acting, they adhere to the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, they obey the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he is their model which they obey, and they spurn and go against everything which is of bid'ah, of innovation, which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ did not come upon. And we mentioned as a side point to that, how do we deal with the people of bid'ah, depending upon the benefit of the Sharia. The fifth point is that since the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ needs to be interpreted for us, they follow the way of the Salaf, right? And those scholars which follow the way of the Salaf, and they spurn those who go against the way of the Salaf. And likewise, They therefore spurn all sectarianism that the people who go against the way of the Salaf have invented, and all forms of differences in religion. But they don't just leave the matter at that. They try to work their fullest to gather the Muslims upon the truth and to keep away from the Muslims all causes which lead to their differences and to disputes between them. And that's why they do not have any other name besides that of the Sunnah and the Jama'ah in matters of the usul of the religion. And likewise, they do not make wala and bara upon any issue except for that of Islam and the Sunnah. Okay, so those were the first 7 issues, and there's still some more points which I'll gather inshallah after a prayer. أقول قولي هذا استغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وبعد. We mentioned 7 characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And the 7th characteristic I explained somewhat, and there's still a few issues I need to touch upon. But before I touch upon those few issues I left, can anybody remember the 7 characteristics, or at least some of the 7 characteristics? Some audience, participation from the audience. What are the 7 at least? Or is my American accent that bad? You guys can't understand anything. Inshallah. We said that the first issue was that Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, that even though that they differ in terms, they have differences, disparity between them in terms of the centuries that they might live, or the regions of the earth, or in their knowledge and their adherence to Sunnah, still they have some characteristics that link them all. The first of those characteristics is that they show concern to the Book of Allah through memorization, recitation, and understanding its meanings, and toward the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam by being aware of his guidance and by distinguishing what is authentically attributed to him from that which is not authentically attributed to him, and also by having the fiqh, or the understanding of his guidance. And likewise, they follow this knowledge with action, and that they believe in all the scripture, in all of the revelation, and they enter into the religion fully, and that in that matter they follow the Prophet ﷺ and they do not innovate, and they follow the guidance of the Salaf and those scholars who are upon the way of the Salaf in knowledge and action, and they stay away from the way of those who innovate. But with this, they try to, even though there are innovators, this is something from Allah's qadar, they still try to unite the ranks of the Muslims. They spurn the sectarianism, they do not fall into it themselves, but they still try to unite the Muslims upon the truth, and join their ranks upon Tawheed, worshipping Allah alone, and believing in His names and attributes, and ittiba', following the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And they try to keep away from the Muslims all causes which lead to their disputes between the Muslims, or to differences among the Muslims. They try to keep these causes far from the Muslims. And for this reason, in the usul, which means the fundamentals of the religion, the matters of belief, they have no other name except for Sunnah and Jama'ah. And also for this reason, they do not show al-wala, or allegiance, and likewise al-bara'ah, or disavowal, upon any bond except for that of Islam, with the non-believers, and with the Sunnah concerning the people who are from Ahlul Bidah. But amongst themselves, they do not take an issue and cause it a wala and bara between their own ranks, to split their ranks. So the issue now came as some brothers approached me concerning the name of the Salafi, and because I mentioned that in the usul they have no name except for Sunnah al-Jama'ah. So what does this imply? Does this mean that we cannot use the name Salafi? No. The term as-Salaf, as I explained to you, refers to those original Muslims who were upon the guidance of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the first 3 generations. And according to the Arabic language, when the ya is called ya al-nisba, it is the ya which is at the end of a word like Salafi or Mekki or Madani or Masri or something like that. It means that he's from that. So a person is a Salafi means he's from the Salaf. He's following their way. However though, so therefore these two terms, Salafi and Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, are synonymous. Right? They're synonymous. Synonymous in the sense that as a reality in the Sharia, and synonymous also as a historical reality. If you look at the books of the ulama, you find that from the earliest times they used the term Salafi or the Salaf, and they used to understand this to mean Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in which sense? The specific or the general sense? Specific sense, which is Ahlul Hadith. As we said, in the general sense, if a person is from Ahlus Sunnah means that he's not a Shi'i, whether he's following the way of the Salaf or the way of the Khalaf, whether he's a Sufi or he's following the way of the Hadith, because it just means that he's not a Shi'i, he does not revile the companions. This is the general sense of the term, but in the specific sense we mean Ahlul Hadith. So in this case, it's synonymous with the term Salafi or Salafiyun or Salaf al-Salih. However though, and this is the point I want to make clear, that if this term, even though it's from the Sharia, if it is used for partisanship, and if it's used for division, it then becomes forbidden. What's the proof, someone might ask? The proof is that during one of the Prophet's battles, a young boy from the Ansar got into an argument with a young boy from the Muhajirin. The Ansar meaning those Muslims in the city of Medina who welcomed the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ lived amongst them and was able to spread his da'wah from the city of Medina. They believed in him and supported him. That's why they were called Ansar. The Muhajirun mean those people who became Muslims in Mecca and then they made hijrah to the city of the Prophet ﷺ. So the young boy from the Ansar said, "Oh Ansar," calling them to be on his side. They had some sort of fight between them. An Ansari boy and a Muhajiri boy. And the Muhajiri boy said, young man said, "Oh Muhajirin." The Prophet ﷺ came out in their midst and said, "The call of Jahiliyyah, and I am between you all, meaning I'm alive and amongst you, and you're using this call of Jahiliyyah, leave it. It is something which is filthy, which is something which is despicable or hated." So here the Prophet ﷺ condemned the use of the word Ansar and the use of the word Muhajirin, even though these terms were given to them by whom? By Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even though these terms are praiseworthy in the Sharia, the Prophet ﷺ said, love of the Ansar is part of faith is love of the Ansar. And he mentioned that nobody hates the Ansar except for a hypocrite. So even though the term Ansar and the term Muhajirun were given to these groups of the Muslims by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and even though it is praiseworthy for a person to be from the Muhajirin or from the Ansar, yet when the term was used for not for a reason of the Sharia, you see, but reason for group partisanship, it became something disapproved of, and the Prophet ﷺ condemned it. And he said the call of Jahiliyyah, and I'm amongst your midst. So even though it is permissible and it is praiseworthy that a person is from the Salaf, he follows the Salaf, meaning that he does not follow the Khalaf, in the sense that he follows the Sunnah and he does not follow Bid'ah, when this term is used, and this is the important point, for group partisanship or for one's own self desires and to promote himself or his group of Muslims, it becomes something blameworthy in the Sharia. It becomes blameworthy in the Sharia. Now, how do I now know that if the person is using it to self-promotion or if he's using it for out of a noble cause? How would I know this? There's no way to know this. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows, right? I mean, when now somebody uses the term Salaf, right? Or he uses the word Salafi or Salafiyun, do you know that if his intention is here just to promote himself or out of group partisanship, or is he doing it as a religious reality, trying to explain the merit of these people, the Salaf, and the merit of following their way? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that and has attention. So you cannot just assume that because he's using the term that therefore he's using it to divide the Muslims. This is a false claim, okay? But at the same time, we must understand ourselves, because when we use the term ourselves, we must always check our intention and our behavior. Are we using it out of trying to express a Sharia reality, that the way of the Salaf is the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the way of the Khalaf is the way against the way of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or are we using it just to identify ourselves with a certain way in order to promote ourselves? And our motivation is not purely for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everybody should check himself. I cannot enter into your heart, nor can you enter into my heart. But we must check ourselves in this matter. And this is what I wanted to bring out concerning this term. So therefore, to use the term as Salaf, or as Salafiyun, or Salafi, is praiseworthy in the Sharia. And it is like the term Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in the specific sense. However, when it is used for group partisanship, like in this hadith, when the Ansari said, "Oh Ansar," or when the Muhajiri said, "Oh Muhajirin," in order for group partisanship, the motivation was not a matter of Sharia here. It was just because they got into a fight and he wanted his people to be on his side and so forth. Then it became blameworthy. The Prophet ﷺ said, "The call of Jahiliyyah and I'm amongst your midst, forsake it, for it is something which is despicable." That's concerning the term Salaf. Also, we have to understand that sometimes people who are with us, they adhere to the way of the Salaf in Aqidah, but sometimes they have a confusion concerning the use of the term Salaf, in the sense that they say we should use the term Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah only, and not use the term Salaf. And the reason why is they have some confusion between the two usages of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Let's try to understand this point. I mentioned earlier that Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah has two senses to it. A general sense, which most Muslims identify. If you ask the average Muslim on the street, are you a Sunni? Or he will think of the term Sunni or Shi'i. That's what he understands of it. If you ask a Christian who is aware of the Muslims, like they write in their newspapers, he will say Sunni and Shi'i. This is the general sense. And this enters in this use of Ahlus Sunnah, even those people who are not adhering to the Sunnah and beliefs, like the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, the Sufis, and so forth. In the sense that they're not Shia. However, though, in a specific sense, which is a praiseworthy sense, which is in the sense for when we come to the hadith and we say that the saved group in the Day of Judgment is Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, and we say that the victorious group in this world is Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, it means in a specific sense meaning those of Ahlul Hadith. So some people, because they don't make this distinction, they say don't use the term Salafi, don't use the term As-Salaf, but only use the term Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, meaning by this to try to make the circle of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah too broad, so it enters into Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah those people who are not from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in the specific sense, but might be from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in the general sense, in the sense they're not Shia. And this is a mistake that some du'at fall into. So, while we say that the two terms are interchangeable, and the usage of one term as opposed to another term depends upon the benefits gained, and also depends upon the customs of the usage of the people in your area. At the same time, we should not use Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah and abstain from using the term As-Salaf or Ahlul Hadith in order to make the circle of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah so broad in the general sense, and therefore it enters into our ranks Sufis and Ash'aris and Maturidis and so forth, who are from Ahlus Sunnah since they're not Shia. And likewise, we should not use the term As-Salaf, right, in the specific sense, Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in the specific sense if we're using it for group partisanship, when our motivation is not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it becomes a motivation for some sort of worldly benefit that we're desiring and seeking. Like in the case of the two boys who fought, and one claimed, "O Ansar," and one shouted, "O Muhajirin." The Prophet ﷺ said, "A call of Jahili, one amongst your midst." So this is the point. And I think with that, we finished the seventh point, which again, mentioning that the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, their characteristic is that they try to gather the Muslims upon the truth, and they try to unite the ranks of the Muslims upon Tawheed and Ittiba', and they at the same time try to push away from the Muslims any matter which is going to cause their division, or any matter which is going to cause their disagreement, and that they do not distinguish themselves with a name in the usul of the deen other than Sunnah and Jama'ah, and likewise they do not have an wala and the bara, allegiance or disavowal, except upon the bond of Islam and upon the bond of the Sunnah. So we've now covered 7 characteristics, and there are 7 left which we'll do in the afternoon session. Right now we have a little bit less than an hour, 45 minutes or so, which we'd like to take some questions from the brothers or the sisters. And Brother Idris will be moderating the session, so he lets him choose who can ask the question, so you won't get angry if maybe we'll get angry. The brother asked a very good question. He said, if a person is not from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the specific sense, can he enter into paradise? And this question appears because when we say that the saved group is Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, does this mean that we're implying that everybody else will be in the hellfire who's not from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah in the specific sense? I believe I answered this question when I was here in August when we did the lectures of Aqidah Wasatiyah, but if I did not, or if the brother wasn't there during those lectures, I will now repeat the answer. Ibn Taymiyyah was asked this question, because when he wrote his Aqidah Wasatiyah, as many of you might know, in the year 705, the scholars, who were the evil scholars of his time, tried to see him imprisoned and tried to stop him from giving da'wah. So what they did was they complained to the Sultan of the Muslims at the time in Egypt that this man is causing much fitna and corrupting the beliefs of the Muslims. So they had a debate that lasted for 3 sessions in the year 705 with Ibn Taymiyyah. And one of the complaints they accused Ibn Taymiyyah that he had false beliefs and he was of evil beliefs. So Ibn Taymiyyah said, let me bring out from my house an essay which I wrote, which was the Aqidah Wasatiyah, which I wrote 8 years ago. So since I wrote this thing 8 years ago, you will not think that I'm going to say something now in agreement with you just so that I won't get in trouble. But this is something I wrote 8 years ago. Send somebody to my house, pull out a copy, and this copy is well spread in the Islamic world, and from this you can see my beliefs, and we'll discuss it from this issue. So one of the issues they brought up was that because Ibn Taymiyyah in his opening paragraph, he says this is the creed, هذا اعتقاد الفرقة الناجية, الطائفة المنصورة, أهل السنة والجماعة. This is the belief, a compendium of the beliefs of the saved group, the victorious group, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. So one of his opponents from the Ash'ari saying, do you mean by this that if we disagree with you in some of these points in the Aqidah, it means we'll be in the hellfire? Ibn Taymiyyah said, no. This is the point that I want you to understand. He said, if you are following the Sunnah, then you are protected, you're saved. But if you do not follow the Sunnah, you're under the threat of Allah's punishment. Now, we know that Allah might forgive you, or He might punish you. And likewise, you might have other good qualities that will remove the sin, like having much good deeds, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have tested you in this world with some hardship from illness or poverty or something, or for instance that you might also have in the hereafter you might receive the shafa'ah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are about 11 ways, 10 or 11 ways in which the punishment for a sin can be removed. Okay? Of course, tawbah is the first of them, and then good deeds and having some sort of hardship, the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or just the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَيَغْفِرْ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. He forgives any other sin besides that, besides shirk, to whoever He wills, and bid'ah being one of those sins, because bid'ah is less than shirk. Of course, there are some bid'ahs that throw you out of the fold of Islam. That's a different story. So therefore, our rule is that those groups which are not from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, there are two types. There are sects which are outside the fold of Islam, even though they claim that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. An example would be the Qadianis. They are outside of the fold of Islam because they believe there is a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And likewise, another example would be, I'm trying to think of an example, those extremist Shias, like the Druze or the Nusayris or the Ismailis. And there are other groups, like the Bathanis for instance. These are outside of the fold of Islam. So they are not part of the 73 groups. They are murtadun. They are disbelievers, apostates. Within these 73 groups, there is one group which is upon the Sunnah and the other 72 groups. Those people from the other 72 groups are under Allah's threat of punishment. But will they be punished or not? Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Because He might have good deeds which will wipe away the punishment. Or He might have been suffered in this world, some sort of suffering because of his being away from the Sunnah. Allah punished him in this world, gave him some sort of sickness or some sort of hardship, poverty. Or in the hereafter the Prophet might intercede for him. Or he might just receive the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we cannot say definitely that these people are in the hellfire. Just like the person who commits illicit sex outside of marriage. Did not the Prophet ﷺ say that in his Isra, he saw men and women who were naked and they were boiling in cauldrons? And he asked Jibreel, who are these people? And he said, they are the ones who have sex outside of marriage. Does this mean that everybody who in this ummah who has this sin of having sex outside of marriage, he will be punished in the Day of Judgment? What is the aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah concerning this? Huh? Does anybody know? Huh? No, if you repent, of course the sin is removed. But if you don't repent and you die from the sin, does that mean he'll definitely be punished? We don't know. But we fear for him, because he's died upon a major sin. And Allah has promised and warned that He will punish for this major sin. So there is a great fear in our hearts that because he died on that major sin, or she died on that major sin, they will be taken to the hellfire. Even though that they will eventually make it to paradise because of their Islam, because of their Iman. So likewise, the person who follows in a stray group, okay, we fear for him if he dies like that he'll be taken to the hellfire. But can we be certain that he'll be taken to hellfire? No, only Allah knows. The second issue is that, which I want to bring there, even though it relates to your question, even though it was not expressed in the question, is that don't forget that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only judges the people according to what knowledge they have received. So in times when the Sunnah is gharib, is unknown, and the people of the Sunnah are few, the responsibilities of the people of that time are less. In the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not judge them upon the same scale as those people who were there when there was an abundance of knowledge. And that's why, for instance, we find Abu Hanifa, just as a worldly application of this rule, Abu Hanifa said, he who does not know that if Allah is upon the throne or not, or says he does not know where Allah's throne is, in the heavens, above the heavens or on earth, he's a kafir. But yet Ibn Taymiyyah, who quotes Abu Hanifa saying this, says that he came across a people from the Jahmiyyah and Hululiyah. And then Hululiyah means that they believe that Allah is everywhere. And Ibn Taymiyyah said to them, if I was to say what you would say, I would be a kafir. But you are not kuffar in front of me, because you have no knowledge. So the point is, in times when the sunnah is unknown, and knowledge of the way of the Prophet ﷺ is unknown, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not show any injustice to the creation. And therefore, He will not hold them to that same scale as He will when the sunnah was prevalent. However though, if the sunnah is unknown because it wasn't available, but if the sunnah was unknown because they could care less to follow it, and they could care less if they wanted to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ or not, then they're held responsible, because they showed no initiative. But if they tried their best to obey Allah and obey the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and yet nobody explains to them the correct belief in Qadr, and so he had some Qadri view, does that make him all of a sudden, we rank him as those people who were in the time of Ibn Umar, and the Sahaba refuted their views and they insisted upon it? Of course not. And likewise in the Day of Judgment they'll be different, they won't be judged in the same way. So the point is that those people who adhere to any group other than Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah and are within the fold of Islam, not those sects which are apostates like the Qadianis and the Ismailis and so forth, and the Druze, these groups are under the threat of punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result, they might go to the hellfire if they don't repent. But then again, they might have good deeds which will wipe out that. Like they might have done jihad to defend Islam, and they fought until they died in the battlefield. Allah might, by this great deed, might forgive them. Or they might have had charity or prayer. Or they might have, because they didn't adhere to the sunnah and they were negligent, Allah might have punished them in this world with some harsh punishment that will be an expiation for that sin. Whether that punishment is illness or death or whatever that punishment might be, poverty. And likewise, they might gain the intercession of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He forgives any sin to whom He pleases. He just might forgive them on the Day of Judgment and enter them into paradise. Okay, so our point is, in final thing, that we say that they're under the threat of punishment, therefore we fear for them, and we call them to sin. And Allah knows best. Now, question? The sister, or the brother wrote the question. Sister, when you say stay away from the people, not of the Salaf or Bid'ah, do not read their books, listen to their speeches, or read their works, do you apply this to Muslim works, etc., from other schools of thought? And each of these schools of thought were to say the same thing: I do not read, listen to other works. How would a Muslim belong to these different schools of thought, be guided to the right path of the true way? This is a very good question. May Allah reward the questioner. The point is, we said that if we agree that the way of the Prophet ﷺ is the truth, and we have been guided to the truth, and therefore we have no reason to investigate into falsehood. I mean, if you're in doubt of the truth, then you might want to go and investigate into falsehood. Just like now, would you say as a Muslim, well, why don't you go to church tomorrow and just listen, because you don't know. I mean, maybe Jesus is the Son of God. No Muslim would say that. Because he's certain in his heart. He has yaqeen. Not just knowledge, he has certainty in his heart. He has that Allah has no son. And therefore, he has no reason to go to that. Okay? And likewise, matters of the Sunnah. If you are certain that the Prophet ﷺ's companions are upon the truth, and that even though they were not infallible from sin and error, but yet that they were the best of mankind, and they spread the religion of Islam after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, do you need to now travel to Iran to investigate the Shia method and say, well, let me do a year of study in Qum just to make sure, because maybe there's a chance that Abu Bakr and Umar, ma'azallah, were upon falsehood? No. But this is different from the issues in which the ulama have difference upon, and they are all ulama of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. For instance, let's just say a brother traveled to Arabia and he studied fiqh. And he studied fiqh with the scholars of Arabia are basically Hanbali in their madhab. And so he studied the books of fiqh like Ibn Qudama, Al-Mughni. Okay, and he studied the scholars of Islam until he reached a certain stage of knowledge. Do you say to him now, don't read Al-Majmur', which is a book in Shafi'i fiqh by Nawawi, because you studied Hanbali? Of course not. Because this is a matter in which the scholars of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah themselves have different concerning certain matters of ijtihad between them. So here, a person should seek knowledge, and he should try to learn from as many scholars as possible who are Muslims upon the way of the Sunnah and Jama'ah. Because they are men, and they might err in their ijtihad, or they might forget, or they might make a mistake. So the point is that the term school of thought is somewhat vague as to what the sister implies. If the sister implies the schools of thought, the madhahib which are well known in matters of fiqh, like the Hanafi and the Shafi'i, the Maliki and the Hanbali fiqh, then this is not my intent. But if she means by schools of thought, those madhahib which are outside of the fold of the Sunnah, like the Shia or like the Ash'aris, or like the Maturidis and so forth, then obviously you should not read that thing unless you're a scholar. Or a student of knowledge who's reached enough knowledge that the scholars say that you can, investigate into these books. Because the point is, if you do not have Sharia knowledge, you might get confused. And how many brothers and sisters have you met who, because they don't know anything about Islam, sometimes when Christians come to them, they're somewhat confused concerning basic things that we take for granted, like is Jesus the Son of God or not? Many times I have come across Muslims, young men who are confused concerning this issue because they don't know anything about Islam, even though they're Muslims from Muslim families, and yet they come in contact with people who are Christians, and therefore they have some sort of confusion. So likewise, if this is concerning clear matters like that, what about those matters which are somewhat confusing for some people? Like the issue, are the actions of man part of the creation of Allah, or does man create his own actions? You should know what the people of the Sunnah say, and hold firm to that, and not try to investigate the books of the people who differ from the people of Sunnah concerning matters of belief like Qadr. And inshallah ta'ala that answers the question. We have another question here. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Was it a characteristic of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the ulama scholars, to make takfir? If yes, is it halal for the common folk, that is me or anyone with knowledge, is to a little extent, but not enough to make takfir, as we take an example from the scholars? No. You should know that a takfir is one of the rulings of the Sharia. One of the rulings of the Sharia. And therefore it has conditions that must be fulfilled, and likewise it has what they call mawani', or obstacles that must be removed before the ruling of takfir is applied. And also, just because a person does an act of kufr doesn't mean that he's a kafir necessarily. Because of those issues, the conditions that must be fulfilled and the obstacles that must be removed. I'll give you an example. For instance, like the incident I related to you about Ibn Taymiyyah, when he said to those people who believe that Allah is everywhere, he said that if you had knowledge, you would be kuffar, but since you do not have knowledge, you're not a kafir. But if I was to believe like you believe, I would be a kafir. Now, one of the most conditions that must be removed is ignorance, in the sense that if somebody does something of kufr, he does not become a kafir if he's ignorant that's kufr. He doesn't become a kafir if he's ignorant that's kufr, because until the knowledge reaches him. Likewise, if he misunderstands, and he makes some sort of ta'wil fasid, a misinterpretation of the Quran and Sunnah, we do not necessarily call him a kafir because of that. So since takfir is one of the rulings of Sharia, only the ulama should pronounce takfir. Only the ulama should pronounce takfir. And the common folk of the Muslims should not pronounce takfir, because it's a very dangerous ruling. Indeed, the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Ibn Umar, reported by Muslim and others, that whoever says to his brother, meaning his fellow Muslim, Ya kafir, O kafir, it has fallen upon one of them. Meaning that if he's not a kafir, it has returned back to you. So one should not engage in takfir, but what we should be engaged in is knowing what are the nawaqid al-Islam, what are the things which are causes of apostasy, so that we do not fall into that. You see what I'm saying? If a person makes shirk, we cannot call him a kafir. The ulama should make the judgment if he's a kafir or not. However, though, we should know that shirk is one of the causes of apostasy, so that we do not fall into that. Okay? We have to know that if you make fun of anything of the Islamic religion, or its rewards, or its punishment, or the Prophet ﷺ, that this is kufr. But if we find someone making a joke, we cannot call him a kafir. This is for the ulama to do, not for us to do. But we should know that this is kufr, so we do not fall into that. Okay? And inshallah ta'ala, that's an answer to the question.
Right, I have recently spoken to Bayan myself. They have denied that a new prophet has come. I do believe that the Mahdi and Isa ibn Maryam has come to this earth. What do you believe that would fall into that issue again?
As far as the Qadianis, the question was that the Qadianis, or the brother approached the Qadiani, who does not say there was a prophet after the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, but they say that the Ghulam Ahmed was just the Mahdi and the Isa combined together. What do we consider them? Both groups, the Qadianis are two groups. Those who identify Ghulam Ahmed as a prophet, and those who do not identify him as a prophet, I think they're called the Lahoris amongst them, and say that he's a Mujaddid, and they say that he's the Mahdi and he's Isa. The ulama of Islam have declared that both groups are kuffar. and that is just a play on words from the second group. And if you'd like, refer to the book by Ihsan Ilahi Dhahir, Rahmatullahi alayhi, Qadianiyat, and also another book is This is Qadianism, which was printed by I believe Muslim World Aid, perhaps Brother Idris can afford to copy it to you, that then explains that that both groups are kuffar. So this is what the ulama have agreed upon, therefore this is what our position is. Why exactly the reasoning for that, I don't recollect at this time.
Can you comment on Sheikh Nazim and the Naqshband and Barikat, and whether they differ with the Sunnah in any way?
As far as Sheikh Nazim and the Naqshbandiyya, I don't know Sheikh Nazim particularly, and I have only read a few of their works from their Jama'ah. But I can tell you about the Sufis in general and the Naqshbandiyya being part and parcel from them. The Sufis of today, meaning the Sufis of our century and the few centuries preceding us, try to pass off their claims and their madhab by identifying themselves with classical scholars of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah who are known for their piety and their zuhd, among which is Ma'ruf al-Karhi or Sahl al-Tustari or Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, others. Okay, these men were scholars of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah who were known for their piety during their time. Now, the Sufism which is practiced today is a sea of filth, because it has gathered in their framework of their beliefs and in the framework of their practice every sort of creative disbelief that you might imagine on the face of the earth. For instance, in belief of Allah, you find the Sufis of today, irrespective of the tariqah, whether it's Tijani or other, they identify the creation with Allah. They believe in one universal existence. Okay, this is being the belief of Ibn Arabi, which is called Wahdat al-Wujud. And likewise, sometimes they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala incarnates into certain of them, and they believe in hulul. These are beliefs of disbelief, and neither Ma'ruf al-Karhi or al-Junayd or Abdul Qadir al-Jilani believed in this. I mean, Junayd said that Tawheed is to distinguish between he who is eternal and he who is not eternal, meaning to distinguish between the creator and the created. And that's why these Sufis who believe in Wahdat al-Wujud call al-Junayd, who's considered the sheikh, the imam of the Sufiya, they consider him a kafir outside the fold of Islam. Likewise, you find that concerning the Prophet ﷺ, they believe that they can reach a rank higher than the prophets in general, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And they say, for instance, as they quote against Bayan al-Bistami, that he said, "We have traversed the sea which the prophets have only stopped at its shores." Concerning the awliya, we believe there's awliya, as I explained in the Durus of Aqidah Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, Aqidah Wasatiyya, that Allah blesses certain men and He gives them karama as either a need that they need to help them, or either as a proof because these people are upon the Sunnah and therefore to show the truth of the Sunnah. They believe that the awliya can control the universe and do whatever they want, and that they can control, people's lives and deaths. As one of them quotes in that book of theirs, he said that one of the awliya said that I have not said kun fayakun, be it is, for the last 20 years out of respect for Allah. Meaning that if he wanted to, he could do it. And these are beliefs of kufar. Likewise, they think that to seek paradise or to flee from the hellfire is a fault, and that rather the salik, or the one who's upon the road, should seek al-fana, which means to unite with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, in their acts of worship, you find each of them has his own sharia, each of them has his own way of dhikr, each of them has his own way of worship, his own clothes that he tells his followers to wear, his own foods that they tell to eat, or acts of worship. And they base this upon dreams, upon meetings they say they have with the khidr, upon the spirits, they say they are in contact with the spirits, which mean the jinns in this case, and so forth. So really, if you look at Sufism, I'm saying, as it is practiced today by the different tariqas, it is completely different than the understanding of at-tasawwuf, which was practiced in the time of the earlier Muslims. And that's why, and this is a benefit for the brothers, that when you hear or you read something, you have to understand the context in which it's used. Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, in his great book called Al-Kafiya Al-Shafiya, fi Intisar al-Firqa al-Najiyah, which means that which is sufficing and that which is sufficient in giving victory to the saved sect. It's about 5,000 lines of poetry, which is known also as Niniya Ibn al-Qayyim, which he describes the Aqidah. He says about Ahlus Sunnah, he says, Sunniya Sufiya, that they are Sunnis and Sufis. But he didn't mean Sufis in terms of these whirling dervishes who run around and do these types of things. But he meant in the sense that they were people of piety like the earlier Muslims, okay? Now he comes specifically to this Naqshbandi thing. Suffice you, I'll give you one of the karamat of a Naqshband, and you decide if this is upon the way of the Prophet ﷺ or not. The Shaykh of a Naqshband is reported to have told Naqshband himself, who he appeared in the Middle Ages, this gentleman, that he should be very humble, which is good to be humble in Islam, there's nothing harder, and even humble with the animals, okay? So much so that the Naqshband himself, he took this advice to the fullest, that if he would see a dog pass the road, he would hold up and he would not let the dog, cut the dog off, let the dog have right of the way first, out of his modesty. And then one day he was going forth, and a dog fell on his back, and raised his 4 legs up to the sky, and started to make dua, and started to tell Shaykh Naqshband to say Ameen. And so then the Shaykh Naqshband himself sought the tawassul, the intercession of the dog with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is considered one of the greatest karamat of Shaykh Naqshband. Can this way be the way of the Prophet ﷺ, that you start now seeking? We condemn people who seek the intercession of the dead righteous Muslims, like the prophets, like Isa ibn Maryam and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, or those who seek the intercession of the Prophet's companions, like Ali, like the Shia, and so forth. What about seeking the intercession of a dog? And is this a karamah which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give a man for following the sunnah, that he would make a dog fall on his back and raise his legs up to the sky and say Ameen after I make dua? And then the man would then do so, and then after the man was overcome in tears, he said, "Oh Allah, I intercede through you by the dog," and so forth. And this is obviously against the sunnah. So this just shows you, and they relate this in their books as one of the karamat of Shaykh Naqshband. And what comes after that is even worse. So, this individual himself, Shaykh Nazim, I don't know who he is, I never met him, nor have I read any of his works, but I've met some of his followers in the United States, and I've seen some of their literature. And as usual, it is filled with inaccuracies and deviations from the Sharia. But even if this was, not the case, we know that if they were from the truth, they wouldn't adhere to a man who prayed to a dog in the first place. And Allah knows best. Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. Concerning the name Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, in the specifics and in the Salafiyah, when does a person know if he or she has entered into this group of people, or does he or she ever know? So what knowledge and understanding is required to enter into this group, or does just one have to hope to be with this group? Obviously, when we say Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or following with the Salaf, we don't just mean in matters of belief, although we start in the matters of belief, right? We mean the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is, as Al-Fudayl bin Iyad said, when he was asked, what is the characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah? He said, it is to know what you've entered into your stomach. Is it halal or is it haram? Meaning that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ doesn't just enter upon belief, because if you are so concerned what you put in your belly, if it's halal or not, you'd be more concerned what goes into your ears or goes into your heart, if it's correct truth or falsehood. So the Sunnah, we shouldn't understand just the Sunnah just to be just matters of belief, but rather it is one's life. And therefore, we need to be from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in belief, in worship, in our behavior, in giving da'wah. But at the same time, if we err, or if we make a sin, it doesn't necessarily mean we're outside of the Sunnah and Jama'ah. Okay? It means that we have fallen short in that aspect. We are sinful, or we are wrong in that aspect. And therefore, our adherence to Sunnah and Jama'ah is not complete. It is less in that aspect. Likewise, however, though, when we have a false belief, we can say that we're not from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. For instance, like we revile the Prophet's companions. We know for certain that we're not from the Sunnah Jama'ah. So there's no way you can say, when do I become fully from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah? That means that you fully follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But what you need to do is you need to obey the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and understand Islam as the earliest Muslims understood, and work in your life to that. And this is what is called tarbiyah or tazkiyah, purifying the soul, in the sense that when you learn that you're doing something which is sinful, you leave that sin, you make tawbah immediately. And when you know that you had some sort of misconception, you correct that misconception, you learn that issue. And so forth. As you grow older in your life, you will come in front of more knowledge and more experiences, and therefore you are always modifying your behavior and your worship to try to reach as much perfection as possible. But however though, the key to following the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is with the beliefs. And that's why we should spend time knowing Tawheed, because this is the first step as it is the final step. And for this reason Allah has created us. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created jinn or man except to worship me. This is why Allah has sent the prophets. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنْ يَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. We have sent to every single community a messenger saying, worship Allah alone and avoid the taghut. And Allah knows best. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan wa iyyakum. Regarding what you mentioned about practicing what we preach, commanding the good while practicing this ourselves, how do we go about advising someone who is perhaps more knowledgeable than ourselves if we see them back, biting, lying, when we may not necessarily be acting upon our own advice? Is this hypocritical to do so? If we do not, are we sinning, going against the command to enjoy the good and forbid the evil? Right. There's two things which has to be distinguished over here. You will never find a person, if somebody says, I'm not going to give da'wah, or I'm not going to command good or forbid evil, or I'm not going to advise somebody until I am sinless, then you'll never give da'wah, and you'll never command good or forbid evil, and you'll never advise anyone. But rather, one should avoid talking about those matters which he does not practice. You see what I'm saying? And one should not, just like he doesn't talk about those matters which he has no knowledge from. For instance, you're not a scholar, I'm not a scholar. But if somebody is a new Muslim and asks me, how do I make wudu? Do I say, well, I'm not a scholar, I can't teach you? I show him how to make wudu. But if he asks me, for instance, what is the economic system in Islam? How does Islam look towards insurance? And I don't know what the ruling of the Sharia is concerning this matter. I say, Allah knows best. Let us go ask a scholar and investigate in this matter. Likewise, in commanding good or forbidding evil, one should avoid speaking and encouraging people for things that he knows he does sinfulness in. But at the same time, for those matters which he's not sinful in, and he's applying, there is no harm in advising somebody in that matter. And likewise, advising those people who are more knowledgeable than you or who are older than you, there's no harm. However, though, one has to understand that if somebody's more knowledgeable than you, or if someone is older than you, there's a specific way of approaching them. And that is approaching them very gently. Because you have to show respect to them, you see what I'm saying? And sometimes if you approach them in a wrong way, you don't show respect, and as a result, the message is lost, okay? Or you ask somebody who's knowledgeable and so forth to come and express that to him, of his same level, his same age, for instance, and his same maybe level of knowledge and so forth. But these are just a few advices concerning that, and Allah knows best. Okay, it says much of the dawah in Britain is being propagated in a comparative methodology. This leads many of the callers of Islam studying alternative religions. This leads many of the callers of Islam to study alternative religions when their knowledge of this deen is little, and as they're unaware of the correct aqeedah, etc. Their dawah literature is also geared in that direction, that is Islam versus Christianity, references to the Bible as confirmation regarding Islam. Is this a correct approach? Please verify. Well, we should understand that making comparison between truth and falsehood is a methodology of the Quran. Allah in the Quran says, فَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ, he who disbelieves in Taghut and believes in Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ said that he is firaq, that he is the that he's the one who separates between the people, okay? And Allah has described his book as furqan, which means it separates between truth and falsehood. So the comparison of truth and falsehood is the methodology of the Quran, the methodology of the Sunnah, and it's also the methodology of the earlier Muslims. As Hudayfa said, the people used to ask the Prophet ﷺ about good, and I used to ask him about the evil because I was afraid that I might fall into it. So this is the comparison is one of the best ways, and this is the way you find the Quran usually expressing the truths. However, though, the second part of the question is that when somebody is studying Islam, should his emphasis be, and wants to preach Islam, should he study more about the Bible before he studies Islam? This is where the harm comes. Okay, you find many brothers, mashallah, tabarakallah, he can quote you Saint Gospel and Gospel of St. John and St. Luke and so forth. And he knows all these facts about the Christians. But yet, when you ask him to explain La ilaha illallah, he can't. He's unable to do that. This is the harm. This is not what is required. First you have to study Islam. And when you know Islam, then you begin studying these other matters, like different groups and different sects and so forth. So the first part is you study Islam, and then when you reach the level of studying Islam, that you have a firm handhold, then you start beginning to study the groups. And also, the other thing is that you don't need to make new research concerning most of these groups and most of these religions. The ulama of Islam have already written concerning that. So it suffices you as a student of knowledge to see what the earlier scholars wrote and just, package it for your society and your time. And Allah knows best.
What's the approach that starts we should have with each other with regard to when we are trying to get verification from the ulama. Some of us use or approach particular types of scholars to verify a particular point, and when it's not fitting to the answer that we require, to go elsewhere. Now we know that authentic, the deen does not contradict itself, and sometimes we have brothers coming with this scholar's point of view and bringing another scholar's point of view, and where there would apparently be a clash, but due to the lack of understanding that the brothers have themselves, it appears there's a clash, and that causes dissension.
Okay, so in summary for the sisters, the brother's asking about, some brothers taking one opinion or taking another opinion from another scholar, and sometimes this brings a clash of opinions and some sort of differences, even though this is not really part of Islam. You have to understand that the issues of Islam are two types. There are those issues which are clear-cut, and there is no doubt concerning the truth and the falsehood with it. And this, all of the scholars of Ahlus Sunnah are in agreement to. And there are those issues which are matters of ijtihad. And in matters of ijtihad, one should not necessarily make an issue of ijtihad an issue of wala and bara. In the sense that if those people who follow that matter of ijtihad in agreement with him are therefore the true Ahlus Sunnah and those who disagree with him are not. No. But rather, both groups, the possibilities that they could be correct or the possibilities that they could be mercy towards those, because we know that they are being rewarded a lot for their ijtihad, as opposed to those issues which are clear cut and there's an ijma' upon it. Then there's this case we should not tolerate differences in it. You see what I'm saying? So this is the problem. The problem comes not because brothers ask scholars and he wants to ask this scholar because he feels more comfortable with him or he knows him better, as opposed to asking another scholar. The problem comes when the brothers and sisters don't understand the methodology of dealing with differences in Islam. That there are those differences which are blameworthy, and there are those differences which are, we won't say necessarily praiseworthy, but in both groups are rewarded. Those who are correct get 2 rewards, and those who are incorrect have 1 reward. And also because the other issue is because al-hawa, following one's whims and desires. He wants to find the opinion which agrees with what he wants to do, not necessarily if that's the truth or not in this matter which he has. And this is something which everybody has to work on himself. Ikhlas, and freeing oneself from one's desires and whims, that he's only seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his question and in his application of that answer. And so it's a question of knowledge and exposure. It's a question of ikhlas. And if one trains himself, that he understands the methodology of when is a difference accepted and when it's not accepted, and also understands, tries to free himself from following his whims, and however tries to have ikhlas, then inshallah the differences will become less.
You mentioned about staying away from people of innovation from their books, reading their books now. How do we, because the books available in the English world is so limited in terms of the correct understanding, how do we, what sort of methodology can we use to find out which scholars are speaking from the correct point of view, or they're not?
So the brother's question was that I mentioned that, or as Ibn Qudama said, that is the way of Ahlus Sunnah, we do not read the books or listen to the words of the people of innovation. So since we have so limited type of literature in the English language, which is upon the Sunnah, then therefore, how should we act in this case? We have to understand that, first of all, in terms of reading books and so forth, that there are people who are upon the Sunnah who can guide us in which books to read and not to read. Okay? And second of all, that books are an issue of qualitative. Yes, there's an issue, say, in the sense that some book might have some mistakes in it, but yet overall is good. So therefore, if there's nothing else which can solve that issue, we tell the people to read that book, because there's nothing else for them to read. But more importantly, we need to learn the Arabic language, you see. I mean, if we want to understand Islam truly, and we want to adhere to the way of Ahlus Sunnah truly, we need to learn the Arabic language. That is the key. I mean, one should remove from himself ignorance in the most general sense. In the sense like ignorance of Tawheed, or ignorance of the basics of belief, ignorance of the pillars of Islam and so forth, in any language he speaks. But once he's reached that, his next effort should be to learn the Arabic language to the best of his ability. To the best of his ability, because that's the key to reading the correct information. Also, you should be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there are some books in the English language which you can spend much time reading, and if you read throughout your life, it would be suffice you probably. Among which is Sahih al-Bukhari in the English language. I mean, its translation, even though it has some faults in it, in general is a translation which is accurate or agrees with the general intent of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And likewise, the translation of the Quran, meanings of the Quran done by the two sheikhs themselves, Taqi bin Hilal and Muhammad Hussain Khan. And there's a lot of information in that. And if the brothers, would read and study that and so forth, they would benefit greatly. And at the same time, learn the Arabic language. So the point is that the key starts with learning Arabic. I encourage all of you to try to learn as much Arabic as possible. And then afterwards, asking those people who have preceded you in knowledge and to the way of the Sunnah, if you have a book, is this book useful or not? And if there's nothing else in the subject, what should I do? And Allah Ta'ala knows best. Okay.
I was wondering, there's just something that one brother said to me about what Imam Bayhaqi said in his introduction to Kitabul Iman, a branch of faith. I'm very confused because basically somebody I know put doubt on, for example, Aqidah Tahawiyah, the classical work on Aqidah Ahlus Sunnah. I was wondering, could you, from a few scholars, scholars who did say, who did verify this Aqidah of Ahlus Sunnah, and also could you clarify what Imam al-Bayhaqi said? Because apparently he criticized Imam Bukhari on something. Was it on his approach to hadith?
As far as the criticism between al-Bayhaqi and al-Tahawi, I don't recollect exactly the issue, if one existed or what the issue was. However, though, if somebody said that al-Bayhaqi and al-Tahawi disagreed or had some differences between them, I wouldn't find that difficult. And the reason why is because both of them were adherents to two different madhabs. Imam al-Tahawi was Hanafi in his fiqh, and Imam al-Bayhaqi was Shafi'i in his fiqh. And sometimes, as a result, the scholars, when they adhere to a madhab, sometimes they would fall into some type of jealousy, and it would lead them to speak harshly against one another. Okay, and this is something which is known by the ulama of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, and that's why they have a rule that the words of contemporaries are not accepted concerning one another. I mean, when scholars of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah criticize one another, their contemporaries, we don't accept what they say concerning one another. We refer to the judgment of those who come after them, who won't have any jealousy. Because as men, and they're not, when we say they're scholars of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, we do not mean they're sinless or that they are free from any fault, but rather they can occur sins to them, they can occur faults to them, but however, they're the best of mankind. And that any fault or any sin which occurs to them is quite little in terms of their great knowledge and their great piety. So, it's not uncommon, for instance, we find that the people of Medina did not like Ibn Ishaq, the great biographer of the Prophet ﷺ. Why? What's the reason why? One of the scholars of Medina, his wife was also a scholar. Okay? And Ibn Ishaq took from her some hadith. And he said, I believe her name was Fatima, he said, I took from Fatima this hadith. This man became jealous that somebody spoke to his wife. So he said, by Allah, he didn't see my wife. Yes, Ibn Ishaq did not say that he saw your wife. All he said, he heard from her this hadith. And it was well known that even in the time of Aisha radiallahu anha, they would come and ask her questions, and there would be some sort of partition between her and them, so that the tabi'in would ask her, so the Sahaba would ask her questions, they would not see her. But at the same time, they would hear from her. And Imam al-Dhahabi, who was relating the story, said, I have a number of female sheikhs who taught me, who I never saw them, but I learned from them some points of Islam. So, you see, this man, because when the man said in public, I heard this hadith from his wife, he was enraged. You see what I'm saying? It's this guy talking to my wife, you know what I'm saying? So he said, by Allah, this man did not see my wife. By Allah, this man did not see my wife. But Ibn Ishaq did not say that he saw his wife. He said, I heard from his wife. You see, so both of them were truthful. When this occurred, the scholars of Medina then thought of Ibn Ishaq as a liar, because this other scholar from Medina said this, so they considered him a liar. So therefore, we find scholars like Imam Malik saying, oh, Ibn Ishaq is a liar, we're not going to take anything from him. Although he was not a liar. He never lied against the Prophet ﷺ, but because it received to them some information, okay? So if there was a difference between al-Bayhaqi and the Tahawi, who are not necessarily contemporaries, but of the same period in general, it doesn't surprise me, because they were upon two different. Al-Bayhaqi is known as a person who pushed the Shafi'i method really in the Islamic world, and Al-Tahawi is one who really pushed the Hanafi method. And even Al-Tahawi himself, he was originally a Shafi'i. His maternal uncle Al-Muzani was one of Imam Shafi'i's greatest students. Okay, and one time in class, his uncle who was teaching him fiqh, said something to him like, "You'll never understand anything." And he was a kid, a young man. So he got so ticked off, he left that circle and said, "Okay, I'm going to study with the students of Abu Hanifa," because his uncle was a little bit harsh with them. So these things do occur, and if you read the seerah of the ulama, you find that these things happen. But that does not mean, if they made these mistakes, that we drop them and we disregard their knowledge and their piety. They were men, you see what I'm saying? And that's why we do not say that any scholar himself, neither Al-Tahawi or Al-Bayhaqi or Ibn Taymiyyah or Ahmed, any person, neither Abu Bakr or Umar radiallahu anhuma, in everything they said and did were 100% right. Only Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has this virtue. And the rest of them, they fall in the balance of the words and the deeds of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that which agrees and that which doesn't agree. Now, the interesting thing is that those people who try to push Al-Bayhaqi, okay, and I know that Al-Bayhaqi, for instance, I haven't read Shu'ab al-Iman, I read the abridged version, not the original version, which is many volumes, but he has a book called Al-I'tiqad Al-Bayhaqi, right? And Al-Bayhaqi has some ta'weel. He has some ta'weel in the attributes. He says that he explains away some of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, like Ibn al-Jawzi, who was one of the Hanbali scholars that came afterwards, those modern day Ash'aris try to push Al-Bayhaqi and Ibn al-Jawzi and others of their scholarship as a shield for their beliefs. Just like the Sufis try to attach allegiance to Al-Junayd and to Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and Sahal al-Tustari, even though they're not following them. Most of the Ash'aris today are Jahmis. They are not Ash'aris. They're not really Ash'aris. Most of them today are Jahmis. And therefore, they use these scholars as a shield, because we find one of the greatest nemesis against Ibn Taymiyyah, who was Taqiyuddin al-Subki. Okay, he says that the ulama have all gathered that the aqeedah of Imam al-Tahawi is a representative of the aqeedah of Islam. Okay, so what they try to do is, because they're trying to fight against the aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in a specific sense, the aqeedah of the Salaf, they try to use this as a ruse, and they try to bring up Al-Bayhaqi and Ibn al-Jawzi. They quote Ibn al-Jawzi, for instance, that when he criticizes those people who we call like Salafis today in his time, and he makes ta'wil of some attributes of Allah. But yet, why do they not quote Ibn Jawzi when he attacks the Ash'aris? You see what I'm saying? They quote Ibn Hajar when it's useful for them, right? But why don't they quote Ibn Hajar or Nawawi when they say that the book Al-Ibana is the creed of Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari himself? And Nawawi wrote the book down by his own handwriting. So they selectively choose the statements of the ulama, which fits in their guides and so forth. Just like the Sufis selectively try to attribute themselves to these pious men of the early centuries, the earlier Sufis. And just like the Shia selectively try to say that they're following Ahlul Bayt, like Ja'far al-Sadiq and Muhammad al-Baqir and Zayn al-Abidin, even though they're far from them. So I agree that, and also Aqeedah Tahawiyah in general follows the Aqeedah of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, but there are some points, like in the issues of Iman, in which he's erred, and he doesn't follow the beliefs of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, as the commentators have brought out, whether it's Ibn Abi al-Izz's classical commentary, or those people who've written smaller glosses upon the creed today. So what I'm trying to say is that if a difference occurred between them, I don't find that surprising, even though I don't know of this difference myself. I'm ignorant. And that don't be fooled that sometimes people try to use these names like Ibn al-Jawzi and al-Bayhaqi selectively, like the Sufis use Abdul Qadir al-Jilani and Junayd selectively, and like the Shias try to use Ja'far al-Sadiq selectively, to try to cover up a madhab which is not their beliefs, which really is like that. And the only way you can tell this is by having, rigorous research. It becomes clear to you the truth of that. No one
attacked Imam Tahawi on his Aqidah.
No, people criticized, I said, certain issues in his Aqidah concerning those issues of Iman. They criticized him concerning that. Even these works of Aqidah, right? When we say Aqidah Tahawiyah, right? It is an expression by Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi concerning what the faith of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is. It is not the Quran sent down by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that he errs in this is not something difficult. But so we take the Aqidah from the Ijma' of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. We say there are certain issues in which they gathered upon, that we don't know a difference upon them. And the ijma' is a hujjah, but it's not because Ibn Taymiyyah wrote al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah, or Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi wrote this Risala, or As-Sabuni, the old Sabuni, not the Sabuni today, wrote a book, and so forth. That itself is not the hujjah. That itself is not the hujjah. The hujjah is in which they gathered upon. And that's why Ibn Taymiyyah in the debate that I mentioned to you, right? The scholar of Damascus, unlike the ruler of Damascus, unlike the ruler of Egypt, was basically, he liked Ibn Taymiyyah. He was like the vice president, he didn't have that type of thing. So he wanted to end the debate and he wanted to protect Ibn Taymiyyah. So what he said, okay, let's just agree that this is the aqeedah of Imam Ahmed. In other words, it's recognized in this country that there are 4 methods which you can follow: Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, or Hanbali. And this is the aqeedah of Ahmed. So you wrote what your method is, and therefore it is, okay, we'll just end the story and let's get up and go. No, he didn't say. Ahmed ibn Taymiyyah got very angry. He said, if this is not my aqeedah, nor the aqeedah of Ahmed ibn Hanbal, or anybody else has the right to write an aqeedah, this is the aqeedah of the Prophet ﷺ. And I challenge you, all those Ash'ari scholars who had gathered for them, that you produce in the next 3 years, or 7 years, he said, any statement from the earliest 300 years of Islam, whether the person was a Shafi'i, or Maliki, or Hanbali, or Hanafi, or Sufi, or Ahlul Hadith, that brings a single word to show me that they went against what I wrote in Al-Aqidah al-Wasitiyah. And the challenge came, and the 3 of the 7 years have passed. Indeed, now, he wrote that debate was in 705, and now we're in the 1414. So 709 years have passed, and they have been unable to respond. Because this type of belief was something which was agreed upon. That as far as Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, there are certain sentences in that creed which goes against the belief of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. And I think that if you look at, Suhaib Hassan, Dr. Suhaib Hassan, he translated a small gloss of Ibn Baz upon Al-Aqidah al-Tahawi, where Ibn Baz points out some of these issues. I saw it in English language. It was printed in Jeddah, I think. And perhaps I can help identify for you some of the issues in which Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi said to have deviated from the consensus of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah concerning some of those points in Al-Aqidah. Also, there's another point just for the benefit of the brothers and sisters. The matters of Aqidah are 2 types. There are those matters of Aqidah which we do not tolerate differences in. There's those matters of Aqidah which differences are permissible. And that Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah have disagreed concerning that. Like what was created first, the throne or the pen. Okay, Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah has 2 opinions concerning this. So, if somebody says the throne, because of some evidence, somebody says a pen, this is not considered from the fundamentals of the Aqidah, in which the person who goes against it goes astray. And like when I was here in August and we did Aqidah al-Wasitiyah, I mentioned another issue, that who is the 3rd best in the Ummah, Uthman or Ali? There are 3 opinions for Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. Some say Uthman, some say Ali, and some say they're silent concerning the issue. They don't want to say this or that. So this Ibn Taymiyyah says this is not an issue in which the person who goes against the correct opinion, which is that Uthman is better than Ali, goes astray upon. But if you say that Ali is better than Abu Bakr or Umar, you're astray, because this is something, there's no difference of opinion. So I'm trying to say the matters of Aqidah themselves are not all of the same level. Sometimes differences in some of the matters of Aqidah is acceptable, because they're based upon ijtihad, and Allah knows best. This question? There are some brothers who may... I don't understand the question, but what the specific example, but the questioner says that there are some brothers, let's just say some people who might be doing some good in calling the people to Islam, but they have mistaken beliefs. I think there's an example which I don't understand. What is to be our approach toward these people? Do we expose them or hide their faults, or just rectify their wrong beliefs with the people? We do all of that, in the sense that, as I said, that Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, they follow the truth and show mercy towards the creation. So in that which they do good, we say this is correct. You see what I'm saying? For instance, let us say a person who has wrong beliefs. He doesn't believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is upon his throne, okay? But yet he's building a message for the Muslims. Do we say, no, don't assist him in building the message for the Muslims? But this is something from the Sharia. We agree to this point. But when he says that Allah is not upon his throne and that Allah is everywhere, we stand up and we say that this is incorrect belief. And we expose it. And it depends upon the degree of deviation, our stance. If the deviation is great, you see what I'm saying, that it tantamount to disbelief, or it's one of those severe bid'ahs, then we have to be very harsh, okay? And if the deviation is not to that degree, and it's because the person is ignorant or hasn't had the chance to be taught, then we don't take as harsh a stance, but we still expose the truth. As I said, that these characteristics, which we mentioned 7 of them, can all be summarized in the statement of Ibn Taymiyyah. We follow the truth, and we show mercy toward the creation. And part of showing mercy to the creation is not to let them go astray. So you expose the wrong. As part of following the truth. And likewise, part of showing the mercy of the creation is that you do not take an issue which, for instance, let's say we were in an Islamic state and somebody stole something. Could we cut his neck? No. But to cut his hand is to show mercy towards the creation. Because you stop sinfulness. And also you show mercy towards him. Because by removing his hand, you're also removing the punishment of theft from him. That he won't be asked on the day of judgment. As Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith of Abu Dawud and elsewhere, that it will be expiation for him. Okay? But at the same time, we show mercy towards him. We do not, mutilate his body when we cut his hand. We do not, beat him. We're forbidden to beat him. We do not execute him. We do not insult him. So the point is that the only way you can know the details of this concerning special issue is by having knowledge, any specific issue. And knowledge is only gained from the scholars. And if you do not know, you have to ask the knowledgeable. You have to ask, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you do not know. And Allah knows best. As regards to books translated in English, there are some classical works, such as Tabari's translation of, his tafsir. He mentions Ayah 109 of Surah Al-Baqarah. I'm not certain what the point is in the translation. Or Al-Dhahabi's major sins, and they contain some weak hadith, which we are not clear on. Then what should be our attitude regarding these works? Well, obviously books like Ibn Jarir Tabari's tafsir, or Kitab al-Kibar by Imam Zahabi are recognized by the Muslims throughout the centuries to be classical works which are beneficial to the souls of mankind and represent the true faith of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah and their practice. But as Imam Shafi'i said, Ab Allah and yutim kitab illa kitaba, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has refused that any book would be perfect except for His book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make the Quran stand out from all other works, He made it perfect, that no fault would be in it. But the works of mankind have to have some faults in it. And that fault can be in different ways. It can be grammatical error that most of us would not recognize. It can be in terms of arrangement, that it would be better to put this sentence before this sentence. Or it can be a mistake, he quotes a weak hadith, or he misinterprets a point, or comes to a wrong conclusion, and different types of errors can occur. But those books which are recognized by Ahlus Sunnah to be good, we should read and we should learn from. However, the question comes to translation. Is the translation of that work accurate to the intent of the scholar? For us who do not read Arabic, cannot read the original books. In this case, we need to ask those brothers who are knowledgeable of the Sharia, whether they're scholars or students of knowledge, and then therefore they have maybe a familiarity with the original book and familiarity with the translation. They can say, well, this translation is good, or this translation is too far from it. No one knows this. So there's a question here asked concerning taqwa and iman, and the meaning between those two. Are they similar or are they distinct in meaning? If taqwa is mentioned by itself in a verse in the Quran, it is inclusive of the whole religion, just like iman. If iman is mentioned by itself, it's inclusive of the whole religion. There is a distinction between the two without doubt, but in the sense that it refers to the whole religion. So if taqwa is mentioned by itself in a verse or a hadith, like ittaqallah haythuma kunt, fear Allah wherever you are. Okay? In this hadith only taqwa is mentioned. The issue of iman is not mentioned in this sentence of the hadith. So here taqwa doesn't just mean staying away from the forbidden things, it also means doing the good deeds. And it also means it doesn't just mean actions, it means belief, so it's comprehensive. And likewise iman. Iman, when it's mentioned by itself in an ayah or hadith, is comprehensive. However though, when iman is mentioned with Islam, iman becomes to the matters of the heart, from its beliefs, its statements and its actions, and Islam becomes from the issues of the outer limbs, from statements and actions. And taqwa, when it's mentioned with bir together, joined in an ayah or in a hadith, taqwa becomes a term for staying away from the forbidden, and then bir becomes a term for doing what is commanded. So it depends upon the context in which it's used. So sometimes they're close in meaning and sometimes they're distinct in a lot of those ways. The brother says, Assalamu alaikum, sister alaikum salam. Someone, is originally against the way of the Salaf, but then refutes, then repents from that, and he then still says some strange things with strange evidences or statements which you feel are not. What should your position be towards that person? You know that in the Sharia we judge people by what they outwardly appear with. Okay, somebody says that he's following the rule is that whenever somebody says something or somebody does something, we always carry his words to the best meaning, and we always assume that his intention is an honest intention. For instance, somebody wants to do something amongst us. Do we assume that he wants to split from the ranks of the Muslims? No. We assume that his intention is good. And likewise, if he says something which we feel shaky about, doesn't seem to really click with us, it seems that there's some problem with his statements, do we assume that he intended something evil? No, we try to take his words and construe it in the best manner. Except for those people who are known to us to be deviant or sinful. Then we do not bend over backwards and try to construe a good meaning to their words or try to add a good intention to their a good motivation to their actions. Okay, so if this person has made tawbah and hasn't shown anything which is really, clear, that he's not being a hypocrite and he wants to harm those brothers or sisters who want to follow the way of Ahlus Sunnah, then you should try to construe his words in the best manner. You have to understand that tawbah is in degrees, and that also with a person's tawbah, he also has a process of education and learning. You see, a lot of times we carry the baggage of what we were upon before with us, and that's why the Salaf used to say it is from the good fortune of a young man or a non-Arab. Young man means also young woman, that Allah guides them to a scholar of Ahlus Sunnah. And they would always say that if you see a young man or woman when he first is, becoming religious and so forth with Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, then wish well for him. And if you find him with Ahlul Bid'ah, then feel despair for him, because usually you're upon what you are first start with. Usually, not always. So the point is that, look at Abu Hasan Ash'ari, this great scholar of Islam, who fought in the last part of his life to defend the correct Aqidah, and said in his book Al-Ibana, I am upon the Aqidah of Imam Ahmed and so forth. Yet still, upon further investigation, we find that even in the latter stage of his life, Abu Hasan Ash'ari, rahmatullah alayhi, was agreeing with the Ahl Hadith only in the major issues. But in the specifics of those details, he didn't have enough opportunity to learn their statements concerning that. So he still carried the baggage of Ahl al-Kalam with him. So even though in the major issues he was able to identify the correct opinions with them, in the specific details he didn't have a chance, and so therefore he was still, you find some things which are not really upon the way of Ahl Hadith. So if this is with Abu Hasan Ash'ari, then what about with one of us, who Allah guides to repentance over? How much time will it take for us to learn and so forth? So my nasiha is that, you be patient with your brothers and sisters and encourage them and, try to teach them. And if they make a mistake, correct them in what is best, and know that it takes time for a person to change. And inshallah ta'ala, there's good in all people. We hope the best for them. No one knows best. From IT. Who's IT? Oh, maybe Ibn Taymiyyah. Okay, from Ibn Taymiyyah's statement, if I do not believe in the ulu, then I will be a kafir. Does this imply that to a certain extent ignorance is better than having knowledge? And if that knowledge which is sought, one knows that he will not act according to that knowledge in the time being? No, it doesn't imply that whatsoever. Ignorance is always worse than knowledge. Okay, Allah in the Quran says, are those equal, those who know and those who do not know? So those who are knowledgeable are always better. Okay, those who are ignorant have the danger that their ignorance might not be excused because they might not have put enough effort to learn. You see what I'm saying? Yes, as a principle of Sharia, we will not apply a punishment upon somebody, we will not call somebody a kafir or a fasiq or a mubtada unless he has knowledge, right? But let's say he dies upon that state. Are you certain that he's excused? And he might have been negligent, and therefore we punish for his negligence. So ignorance is never better than knowledge. And likewise, if you have knowledge and you don't act upon your knowledge, even that's sinful. Since you have knowledge, there's hope that you will repent. As a person who's ignorant, he might not repent because he doesn't know the importance of repentance. I'll give you an example. A brother who is trying to be religious and so forth. And as he's becoming religious, his character is not balanced, in the sense that he does some things a little bit too extreme, and he's negligent of other matters and so on. But he's trying to go in the right direction. And there's another brother who does not know anything. Okay? Who would you feel that in the long run has a better chance of being upright fully? One who knows. Because he's starting, and he has some knowledge, and therefore he just needs to be fine-tuned to act upon what he knows, or to have some moderation in his behavior. But the one who does not know, you have to first encourage him, and start up his heart, so that he will seek Allah in the last, the final abode. And Allah knows best. So we have a question which is being written out. This means I answer for 10 minutes, or I only have 10 minutes? Oh, okay. I thought you wanted me to answer for 10 minutes for your question. Okay, fair enough. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, it's not his question. Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah is supposed to unite the Muslim Ummah. So what should be done but to the leaders who disunite the Muslims by implementing non-Islamic law? How can you gain knowledge from scholars who supposedly work for non-Islamic governments? Shaykh ibn Baz, Allahu Akbar. I am ignorant and want to seek knowledge, so please do not take offense. Please answer both questions, as I feel they are both very important. Yes, there is no harm in asking a question. And by Allah, we're all here to learn from one another. I am not a shaykh or a scholar to dictate to you. I am here, your brother, and I've come to learn from you, that I may benefit from you, and you also, inshallah ta'ala, if I have something to offer to you, we can benefit. You can benefit from what that is. And there's no harm in asking any question, so long as we are seeking by that question to resolve the truth. You see what I'm saying? In the sense that if we're just asking the question just to annoy the speaker, in the sense that a person knows that I have a love for Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, and how can I not love him? He's the Imam of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in our time. But suppose that he just says this just to agitate me and so forth, and not to seek the truth. And this is a question which I won't answer. But if the question, as the author wrote, that he wants to seek the truth, and there's no problem, we can sit and we can discuss the issue at length, whether it's in the time I have left or afterwards, as long as until that person is satisfied. Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is supposed to unite the Ummah. So what should be done with those leaders to disunite the Muslims by implementing non-Islamic laws? Those leaders are supposed to be removed by the Sharia. If you mean those secular leaders who put forward a law over the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're apostates. And they have to be removed even by force of arms. This is one of the principles of our aqidah. However, though, there are conditions in the sense that one cannot revolt if that revolt results in more harm to the Muslims. Okay? I'll give you an example. When the Muslims in Syria, somebody might disagree with me in my analogy, that's okay. But when the Muslims in Syria in 1982 revolted against Hafiz Assad, who's a Nusayr, he's a kafir. Okay, he's a kafir not because I'm calling him a kafir, because of the ulama of the Muslimin like Ibn Baz has called him a kafir. Because he believes that Ali is Allah. He identifies Allah with Ali. And also because obviously he's a secularist, he's a socialist, he is a Baptist, okay, fighting Islam and the Muslims. And the harm he's caused the Ummah cannot be summarized as long as we talk. Now, when they tried to do that, the revolt failed. Okay? And also, in the end, they were forced in a compromising position where they went and they tried to make a pact with Saddam Hussein, who was another Ba'athi, disbeliever, an apostate, against Hafiz Assad. So they put their hands, they tried to fight one Ba'athist and put their hands in another Ba'athist. Why? Because they didn't seek the methodology of the Prophet ﷺ removing these rulers. It is required, as Ibn Kathir puts in his tafsir, that when the rulers replace the Sharia, like Genghis Khan did, with a law of their own making, and they become now apostates, that it's required to remove them by force of arms, immediately. But when the Muslims are too weak, and the people who want to adhere to the Sharia in the country are just a few boys, young men, how can they remove a modern state with all its tanks and its armies and its planes? So here the complaint is not concerning the necessity of removing these criminals and gangsters. The point is that they are unable to remove it. That common sense tells you that they do not have the means to remove these people. And therefore, by them doing it, it will result in a greater evil. What was the greater evil? The city of Hama was destroyed. Thousands of Muslim women were raped. Thousands of people were killed. They destroyed a whole city. They killed the ulama. What benefit did it come? And where is this movement now? After 12 years after the incident, they're unheard of. They just disappeared. In 1982, right after the revolt, I came to England, to London, and I visited them and so forth. They used to have this little publication called An-Nadhir and so forth. What happened to it? It all became dust. Because it wasn't the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they take, remember I mentioned that they adhere to the causes, the sunnahs which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts on the earth. Allah in the Quran says, وَعَدْتُ لَهُمْ مَصْطَفَعْتُ مِنْ قُوَّةٍ. Prepare what you can of strength, muster what you can of strength. We know that part of jihad is two types. Jihad is defense of the Muslims, like when Muslims are attacked, like in Kashmir, or Afghanistan, or Eritrea, or the Philippines, and this is a requirement that the Muslims defend their Muslim brethren. And there's another type of jihad to spread Islam to the non-Muslim countries and to subdue them. The greatest aspect of that jihad is to fight the people of the book. I mean, now for the Muslims to send an army to subdue the Christians, from the British or the Americans or the French, is more valuable than to send an army and subdue the Hindus or the Chinese, Buddhists or Confucianists or whatever they are. So why? Because this is greater virtue. And they have a choice. Either they become Muslims and they pay jizya, and they are in a state of humility. Now, mashallah, I'm sure all of you are strong men and have much zeal in your heart. Can you now, change any one Christian country, even this Monaco, probably the smallest city-state in Europe, or what was it called? Liechtenstein. Can you? Of course not. Even if you gather all the Salafi and Sunni brothers in the world, you couldn't take over that. So, we need to temper our emotions with a realism of the age we live in. The Sharia ruling is something which we believe, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward us upon this. And we have no fear to say it, whether, I could care less now if the Christians were hearing this or not. That Islam came, just like the Prophet ﷺ said to the people of Mecca, that he was sent with the sword. And when the people of Mecca, when he was going around the Kaaba, the Prophet ﷺ, they were making fun of him. And he said, جِئْتُكُمْ بِالذَّبْحِ, I've come with slaughter for you. And each of the pagans of Mecca, Abu Jahl and his gang, were afraid. And the hadith describes it was as if a bird landed on their head. They came still. And they said, إِنصَرَفْ رَاشِدٍ يَا أَبَا الْقَاسِمِ, go, Abu Qasim being the Prophet's kunya, go, in peace. Because we were, stupid, to insult you like that. We were facetious, and ignorant to do that. So the Prophet told them that. But did he do it in Mecca? No. Allah revealed the verse in Mecca to hold your hands back. Because if the Muslims in Mecca were to try to do something like that, they would have been annihilated. Likewise, it would have harmed it down in the long term. Likewise, when the Ansar came, in Al-Aqaba, I believe the second time they gave bay'ah to the Prophet ﷺ, they came to him and they said, the Prophet ﷺ met with them secretly because they didn't want the other Arab tribes to know that the Ansar were going to become Muslims and the Prophet ﷺ was going to make hijrah to, inshallah, I have to make this point. I can't put myself on fast forward, but just be patient, inshallah. That they didn't want the mushrikeen, because in Hajj all the tribes to know that the Prophet ﷺ was planning on going to Medina. So they came to the Prophet ﷺ secretly and they said to the Prophet ﷺ, if you desire, we will now take over Mecca. See how they were men? There were just a few of them, 70 of them or so. They said, now we will fight all the Arabs, tribes, in Hajj time and take over Mecca. The Prophet ﷺ said, I have not been commanded that. And then when the Prophet ﷺ was on the road to Hijrah, the verse of jihad came, saying that it is permitted for those who injustice have been committed to them that they can fight. You see, it wasn't open. And then finally in the Surah At-Tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, fight all the mushrikeen. Kafra. So the point is, this was in stages. Now if our affairs resemble the stage of weakness, we have to then apply the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ at times of weakness. And those who don't want to apply this guidance cause more harm to the Muslims by their extremism and by them not understanding the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Just like those Muslims who blew up the World Trade Center. You don't know how much harm they caused to us in the United States. And how much the people have, those brothers who are from the Sunnah have been bothered by the kuffar. And likewise, I read an article recently concerning, in a magazine concerning a certain group, and how the kuffar identified many Muslim groups in the United Kingdom. How much harm are they caused by not having wisdom and knowing when to speak and when not to speak. So my brothers, this is a belief we have, and we'll say this belief on the top of our lungs until Allah takes our soul. But we are men of wisdom, following the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ, not children following their emotions. So we will speak when it's time to speak, and we are silent when it's time to be silent, and we will act when it's time to act, and we will restrain ourselves when it's time to restrain ourselves, following in that the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. I guess that's it. The second part of the question about Ibn Baz, inshallah, we can come to afterwards. I think time is right now, right? Inshallah, it's time for Salah. Jazakumullah khairan. Subhanallah wa shalla. after that brief interlude. We still have part B of the questioner asked concerning Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, Hafidhullah, and then we have the remaining points, characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. It pains me that whenever I seem to come to London, somebody wants to ask me about Ibn Baz, because I see so much good in the youth of this city, and inshallah also the sisters from afar, and their questions and so forth, that I would have thought that this issue would have been one of the issues that would have not crossed the minds of people. Had people asked me the question in the United States, I wouldn't be surprised, but in England, that every single time I come, somebody asks me about Ibn Baz, pains me. But at the same time, I hope that in showing the true position we should need towards this Sheikh in particular and our ulama, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards us, and also that you bear patience with me when I go to this brief discourse. I'll try to keep my words short. Without doubt, in my mind, I have no doubt that Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, Hafidhullah, is the Imam of Ahlus Sunnah in our time, and that he has preceded all of the ulama in his knowledge and in his behavior and in his concern of the Muslims, and that at the same time, he's as any scholar, he is not perfect, and therefore when he makes ijtihad, he can err sometimes in his ijtihad. But it is not proper that we destroy all his work for Islam for what we might perceive to be a mistake in his ijtihad. For who are we really to make the judgment? We're not scholars ourselves. That's the first point. Second of all, that I fear for those people who do not know how to hold their tongues back from speaking about the Muslims, and in particular the scholars of the Muslims who are the inheritors of the prophethood, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because as you know, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that verily the prophets do not leave dinars and dirhams as an inheritance, but they leave knowledge. Whoever takes from it has taken a good portion. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will throw them on their faces in the hellfire if they do not restrain from that. For indeed, that verily a man might say a word, لا يلقي إليها بالا, he's not concerned with it, and yet this thing will drop him into the hellfire for 70 years. One should be very careful in his tongue, speaking about Muslims and speaking especially about those Muslims who are scholars. Now I know that the issue of Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz is basically twofold. One issue is concerning his, and I like to speak up front always, I don't like to hide things, to whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me to share with the brothers, concerning his proximity to the Saudi government, as the questioner mentioned, while it is a non-Islamic government. This statement is incorrect. The Saudi government is an Islamic government in the sense that it is not a Kafir government. If we want to understand the Sharia, we must use the words of the Sharia. And therefore, when you say non-Islamic, it means it's a Kafir government. Yes, I agree with you. It is not a rightly guided Khalifa upon the Minhaj of the Nubuwah. And no two people would differ concerning this. Not even Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz would differ concerning this. But at the same time, it is an Islamic government in the sense that the rulers are not, it's not permissible to call them disbelievers, because they uphold the Sharia, and they say the Sharia, and they do much good works for Islam. And what they do, which is incorrect, it's for the scholars to give them nasiha, and for the Muslims to pray that they become righteous and so forth, and for us to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we feel that we've suffered from any of their mismanagement of the resources of the Muslims, or any things that they've done wrong, that it's because of our sins. For we know the story that when Ali ibn Abi Talib was approached by a Bedouin on the battle of Siffin, and he was asked, why is it that during the Khilafah of Abu Bakr and Umar there was no civil strife between the Muslims, and yet when you took charge of the affairs, all this warfare is now occurring between you and Muawiyah? Ali replied to him, because in the time of Abu Bakr and Umar, they were ruling men, leading men like me, and in our time I'm leading men like you. So, the loss of the righteousness of a society or a government is a reflection of that society itself. The rulers of any country did not just drop, from the moon or from Mars or anything like that. They are part and parcel of that society which they were raised, and therefore the sinfulness and the staying away from the commandments of Allah, which is in the society, has reflected why our Muslim societies have such corruption in the governments and mismanagement and so forth. But yet that doesn't mean that we will say, because we're from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, we do not we don't make an ihtijaz bil qadr for the ma'asi. We do not say because this Allah has decreed such that He puts rulers of the caliber of the people, and therefore we'll just sit back and accept that. No, we have to change it. But changing it doesn't just mean criticizing the rulers. It also means changing the people who those rulers have come forth from. You see, I mean, you might imagine that in those secular countries, a lot of Muslims accept secularism as a way of life. And even a lot of the du'at, if you look at some of their writings and teachings to Islam, even though they call for ruling by the Sharia, in many aspects they have some type of secularism in their thoughts. And this is well known. So, we must then therefore balance our criticism with a acknowledgement of what the situation exists. Okay, that's one point. The second point, therefore, is concerning concerning Sheikh Abdul Aziz's fatwa concerning the Gulf War. And this is probably the thing which started most of the criticism. I mean, you should know that this was a fitna. And the ulama of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah differ concerning this fitna. I mean, Sheikh Nasser gave one fatwa, Sheikh Abdul Aziz and others gave another fatwa. And in both cases, they were weighing the evils of the situation. Because from the rules of the Sharia is that that matter which it causes greater evil. If there are two evils, you take the matter which is of less evil. If two evils are in front, you take the matter which is of less evil. This is one of the rules of the Sharia. So they differed in trying to see which was the greater evil. Bringing the Christians and the disbelieving forces, or checking Saddam Hussein with what they could do with their own muster and their own abilities. In any case, who is to know what would have happened if they didn't bring the Americans? I mean, now, if we were to say that the correct fatwa was the fatwa not to bring the Americans and the others, do we really know what would have been the outcome had they not brought the Americans? That would have resulted in better, good, and not a greater evil? I mean, can any of us, in all certainty, stand up and say in front of Allah, I am certain, I have no doubt? No, it's just run. It's just a supposition based upon one's knowledge of the affairs of mankind and knowledge of the Sharia. And since most of us are not scholars and are not even scholars concerning politics, in terms of knowing the movements of countries and the political situation and so forth, therefore it's mere guesswork for most of us. Okay, so even if you're to feel your heart inclined to another fatwa, there's no guarantee that your fatwa, that your heart is inclined to, is the truth in the matter. Just like you cannot be certain that the fatwa which was taken was the correct matter. And furthermore, the issue is over, and it was a fitna which occurred among the Muslims, and this fitna occurred because of our sins. And therefore it's good to try to close this chapter, ugly chapter of Islamic history, and put it behind us, and try to work towards correcting that. And always, we know from the principles of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, the belief of Qadr, that there's nothing purely evil. That even when there's something evil, there's always some good in that. For instance, they give an example that had it not been for the sinful people and the disbelievers on earth, then those acts of worship which we engage in, from jihad and commanding good and forbidding evil and da'wah and so forth, we would not be able to engage in it. And so therefore, even if there are evil, there's good for us in the sense that we can do those acts of worship which Allah loves to see us struggle in our faith. So there's nothing purely evil. But those are just a few remarks concerning such. As far as Ibn Baz himself, I ask each and one of you to go visit him. And you will find him to be different than what you imagine. But you will find him to be truly an Imam Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. I count as among one of the great blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted me, that I had the ability to meet with him and stay with him for some time. And just to give you an example, I mean, something that somebody told me that I myself spoke with him and concerning it. An issue occurred that we had one of our brothers who was working in a military, not military, but in a company which has defense contracts with the United States government. And he was involved in missiles and so forth. So this brother, he asked me to ask Sheikh Abdul Aziz, is his work in that permissible or not? Because I used to tell him, I'm afraid that this work that you're doing might be forbidden. At the same time, he was saying, well, that by him learning this knowledge, he has an ability to get this knowledge for the Muslims. So I was sitting with Sheikh Abdul Aziz in his car, just me and him and the driver and a person in front of us, and I asked him concerning this question. And he responded to me, he said, tell him to leave the job. And I insisted, I said, well, he says this is a knowledge which only he can benefit from, and none of the Muslims can gain, and therefore, by him learning this knowledge, he can do it from the Muslims. Then Sheikh Abdul Aziz said to me that, how do you know that, I'm afraid that he might get a sin and punishment from Allah, because the Americans give this technology to the Jews, and even though the Americans are not currently fighting the Muslims, the Jews are, and therefore he might be helping the Jews in something which he'll get part of the sins for killing the Muslims. And then I kept on pressing Sheikh Abdul Aziz, and he said, listen, when there comes a Muslim country which can use that type of technology in which jihad, then we'll ask your brother to learn it for us. So, I mean, this shows that the man, not only he had a concern for the welfare of a Muslim and so forth, but also he had a knowledge of the Islamic world. He didn't say, as most people would quickly say, well, perhaps, the Muslims can have the knowledge, because he realizes that even if individual has this knowledge of missile warfare, there is now no Muslim country which is going to use that missile warfare knowledge for the benefit of the Muslims. And therefore, for this specific individual, during this specific time that we're living now in the Ummah, that there's a greater chance that he will incur a sin which will be held responsible from Allah than for him to have something in benefit. Now, you might agree with his ijtihad or you might not, but this shows that he has a concern for the Ummah. Another incident I remember is that when we went to his house to have lunch, and after we ate, we were sitting, and I was sitting next to him. And the first thing they did was they brought a radio. And they turned on the radio and some music, and they turned off the volume until the music was over. And then he was listening to the news. It was, I think, a BBC or something in Arabic or something like that. I mean, it was a newscast. And he was listening to it while we were eating lunch. Now, it shows that he's trying to follow the affairs of the Muslim Ummah, not like people suggest that he is, aloof of the affairs of the Muslim Ummah. And then afterwards, after we finished lunch, and we proceeded to the majlis to sit and have tea, a young man came to him who was in his house with stacks of newspapers and magazine articles, and was reading to them. In today's newspaper, such and such incident happened, and in today's this week's issue of some Muslim magazine, such and such article was with it. And Sheikh Abdul Aziz was saying, keep this and keep that, so that he would write responses and talk about these issues. And these were all matters of current affairs, And before that, when I was entered into his majlis in Dar al-Ifta, they were discussing that some scholars from Pakistan were there visiting him, and with them there was a sheikh who was from Iraq, As-Sawaf rahmatullahi, who had come with them, and they were discussing the situation in Benazir Bhutto. And they were discussing, and I wasn't supposed to be there, but they brought me from the back by mistake, and they told me to sit there, and I heard the conversation. They weren't aware that I was sitting there. They were saying that this general is on the side of the Muslims, and this general is with Bhutto, and so forth. So here, then they got up and they had some private words when they noticed there were people there, and they went to a closed room, himself and Sheikh Sawaf and Sheikh Abdul Razak Afifi, and these scholars from Pakistan, the closed room, and they discussed something along there. So, I mean, this is the Sheikh Abdul Aziz's daily routine, okay? And if you ask the other scholars of Islam who know him very well, with full intimacy, like Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Khalaq and others, you will find that they will describe this and more. Also, those scholars who are identified in Saudi Arabia as now, who are first and foremost in criticizing the regime or pointing out the faults of the regime and the government and giving them nasiha, like Sheikh Safar and Sheikh Salman and others, ask them, what is their opinion of that? When you ask Sheikh Safar who was the one who benefited from him, say my teachers are three: Sheikh al-Shafiqi rahmatullah alayhi, Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, and Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz. And this is well known. Ask them. And Sheikh Safar has a bunch of cassettes just bringing out the best of the fatwas of Ibn Baz concerning political matters. And Sheikh Nasir Umar wrote a book saying that the flesh of the scholars is poisonous by backbiting them, when some scholars tried to attack Ibn Baz for his fatwa in the Gulf War. So I mean, these are the scholars who now are identified with speaking out inside Arabia, speaking about against the regime, and yet each and one of them will never say a single word against Ibn Baz, but will concur that Ibn Baz is the Imam of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, not just the Imam of the leading scholars of Saudi Arabia, but of all Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, and they all say that we're from his students, and any good we have, we can get from him. So, I mean, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then from him. So, I mean, this is a reality that many people are unaware of, and Shaitan fools them that they attack the ulama of Islam, and this is not from the guidance of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, but this is the guidance of people who want to throw themselves into hellfire on their faces. And I mean, I have no doubts about that. And if anybody has any doubts concerning Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, go visit him. You'll find his house open. Go visit him and ask him what you want. I asked him about questions of this nature, politics and so forth, and he didn't say to me no. And he didn't know me at that time. I mean, he had no idea who I was. I was just a person. I saw him in the masjid. I was in Riyadh. I said, Sheikh Abdul Aziz, I come from the United States. Can I ask you some questions? He said, come and visit me. Then I asked him some questions, and then he said, come to my house and have lunch. He neither knew me, he neither have any, benefit he's going to gain from me or anything like that. So this shows his humbleness and his concern for Islam. So I mean, these people, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us all. And with this, of course, Sheikh Abdul Aziz, even though in my belief that he's the Imam of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in his time, he's not ma'soom, and he's a scholar, he makes mistakes, and he's a man, he sins and so forth. However, though, it's not for us to judge. But the other ulama, when they write rujood, refutations from the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, according to the understanding of the Salaf, criticize his arguments and proofs, and there's no problem, inshallah ta'ala, in that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So with that talk, we want to come back to what the subject is, which is the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. And we mentioned that they may be summarized in the point that they are following the truth and they are merciful with the creation. Okay, and also we mentioned 7 points, which there's no reason to repeat them now because we don't have much time. We come down to the 8th characteristic, which is that, and this is really 5 points you can say, that they do da'wah to Allah according to the way, the manhaj of the Anbiya, the prophets. And they command al-ma'ruf, which is whatever the Sharia orders or whatever reason orders as being good, and they prohibit the evil, the munkar, according to what, which is whatever the Sharia condemns as evil or whatever reasons indicates that it's evil, according to the regulations of the Sharia. And they commit jihad in the path of Allah to make the word of Allah supreme. And they revive the Sunnah, and they work towards renewing the religion. And they also establish the Sharia of Allah and His ruling in every matter, whether small or large. These are 5 matters which is the 8th characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah. The first is that they do da'wah to Allah according to the path of the prophets. Allah in the Quran says, let there be a group from you, يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ, that they call to the good. And also He has said, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا, who is better, more fair in speaking, who calls to Allah and does a righteous action, so there's the knowledge in the action, and says, I am from the Muslims. And likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to tell mankind, قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي, say, this is my path. أَدْعُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرَةٍ, I call unto Allah with knowledge, I and whoever follows me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, a call to the Lord, to the path of your Lord, ادعوا لسبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن, and with fair preaching and argue with them in the manner which is best. Now I just want to make 2 brief words concerning this. This shows us the importance of da'wah, and da'wah is an obligation upon the ummah as a whole, and sometimes it's an obligation upon every single one of us when there are not enough scholars, like in our times now. Now it's every single one of us has to be a soldier to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, giving da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with whatever knowledge he has. بَلِّغُ عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, spread upon me even a single ayah, which means a sentence, whether it's from the Quran verse or a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. None of us should feel shy to give da'wah, saying I'm not a scholar, because we're in a time of great ignorance, so everybody has to give da'wah. However though, to the extent of his knowledge. One should not talk about that he does not know. One should not interpret the Quran or the Sunnah and he has no knowledge, but rather if he knows something, he's learned something from the Quran and Sunnah with the interpretation, he must give it. And I think every single one of you, if every single one of us in this room, male or female, took one Muslim youth and taught them how to pray and how to make wudu, that'd be great good in that. If every single one of us who knows Surah Al-Fatiha and can recite it properly taught one new Muslim who enters into the religion of Islam, or one child, how to recite Surah Al-Fatiha, that'd have great good in it. So this is what we're saying by da'wah. Yes, for those of you who, mashallah, tabarakallah, have gone overseas and who have memorized the Quran or know some portions of the Quran or know tajweed or have studied with the ulama, wherever it is in the Islamic world, and they have more to share, then let them stand forward and share that. And for those of us who just have some basics of Islam, then we should share those basics of Islam with what we can and the people in need, with nice manners and so forth. The other statement or point I want to make is that we say da'wah according to the manhaj of the Anbiya, the program of the prophets. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the true da'is are the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the best way to know their manhaj is by reading their stories in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not mention the stories in detail of Nuh and Musa and Ibrahim and Isa ibn Maryam, and also the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, except that we may learn from this how to give da'wah to mankind. And that is why the true da'is are the ulama, the scholars. Some of the youth who are in Islamic movements make a distinction between scholars and da'is. They say, well, this brother so-and-so who's, because he's politically active, he's a da'i. And this person, if he's a scholar, they say, well, he's a scholar, he's an alim. This is ignorance. These true da'is are the scholars. Because Islam is not, as some people imagine, just a few political matters, but it is everything. You see what I'm saying? Coming from, as the Prophet ﷺ said, Iman is more than 70 branches, the highest of which is to say La ilaha illallah, that's your aqidah, and the least of which is to remove something harmful from the road. This is all part of giving da'wah to all of Islam. And we said we enter into Islam fully, and we believe in all the scripture, in all the revelation of the 3rd characteristic. And also I'd like to mention that the aims of da'wah are 4. The first one is to make a righteous Muslim, which is a Muslim who's upon tawheed and ittiba and tazkiyah, okay, which I think you're familiar with these terms. And the second aim is to make a righteous society, one that is upon tawheed and ittiba and tazkiyah, And the third aim is to establish the proofs against those people who oppose the da'wah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether they oppose it in major matters like in Tawheed or in minor matters, okay? And likewise, the fourth aim is to establish an Islamic society. The fourth aim, is to clear oneself from the duty which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might ask, like in the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, that whoever has knowledge and doesn't spread it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bridle him with the hellfire on the day of judgment, or cover his mouth with the hellfire on the day of judgment. So these are the four aims of da'wah: to make a righteous Muslim, to make a righteous society, establish an Islamic government and so forth, to establish the proofs against the creation so they have no excuse with Allah on the day of judgment, and also to absolve oneself from any responsibility in front of Allah on the day of judgment. Now, when you give da'wah, you're going to achieve always half of your aims, because guiding a person is up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know from the hadith of Prophet ﷺ that he informed us that there will come prophets on the day of judgment who will have nobody following them, and some will have one or two men following them, and some will have a few men following them. So these are prophets of Allah. And look at the Prophet Noah alayhi salam, who was the first messenger sent to mankind. 950 years just about Tawheed. And yet, who believed in him? Allah says in the Quran, just a few people believed in him. So, the guidance of a person is in Allah's hands. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ. You do not guide whom you love, but Allah guides whoever He wants to. And likewise, establishing an Islamic society is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes tamkeen upon the earth. He's the one who puts the believers in charge. Look at the Prophet Musa alayhi salam, whose ummah is the greatest ummah after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. The proof is that when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saw the ummah of Musa filling the horizon, he said, I thought this was my ummah. And yet, when Musa told his people, his companions from the children of Israel, Bani Israel, to come and make jihad with them against the Philistines, who were mushriks, those people in Palestine, what did they say? You and your Lord go and fight. And Musa died not establishing an Islamic state. So, therefore, this quality is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hands. The only one who established a state and fulfilled Islam to the fullest was the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The other prophets, if you look at their seerah, they didn't establish. The third characteristic is that you apply the proofs against mankind, which is the purpose of the message, as Allah says in Surah An-Nisa, so that mankind will have no excuse with Allah after the prophets. And as the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the hadith of Sahih Muslim, that any Jew or Christian from this ummah, meaning from those Jews and Christians who lived after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who dies not believing in me and what I've been sent with, except that he'll be a disbeliever. And he said that he'll be in hellfire. But he said, after he has heard about me. After he has heard about me. So, and if you look at the verses in the Quran that mention the people of the hellfire entering the fire, always the angels say to them, did not I warn or come to you? And Allah in the Quran says, we will not punish the people until a messenger is sent to them. So the idea is to establish the proof so people will have no excuse in the day of judgment. The fourth thing is the responsibility that you are not punished. In Surah Al-A'raf, we find the story of those Jews who transgressed on the Sabbath. Some Jews said to them, why do you want to warn at people, those who were transgressing the Sabbath, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will destroy them. They said, ma'adiratan, that we were seeking excuse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that we don't get held responsible for not telling them. And that perhaps they might be guided. Do you not see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Musa and Harun to Fir'aun, even though Allah knew that Fir'aun was going to die upon kufr? He didn't say, it wasn't like a waste of time, but you know that as part of establishing the proof and also as part of teaching those who come after him that they should go, even in the most disbelieving of people, and try to give them dawah so that you have no responsibility for their judgment, and also to establish the proof against those people. So therefore we should never feel despair in giving dawah. That, I've been talking about Tawheed now for 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, and nobody has responded. We haven't made an Islamic state. No Christian has become a Muslim on my hand. No. You should not feel despair, because you have at least achieved, inshallah ta'ala, 2 of your aims. That you have absolved yourself in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment from any responsibility. And the second aim is that you establish the proofs against those people who rejected the message. And as far as the other 2 matters, they're in Allah's hands. Allah, for a great wisdom which is with Him, did not allow those things to occur, that these people become Muslims, or righteous Muslims, or that these state is established and so forth. And therefore, we should not, feel angered because of that. Yes, we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us to the fullest blessing. But if Allah decrees for wisdom with Him, as Allah says in the Quran tells us, that they do not question Him what He does, but He asks them on the day of judgment what they did. The next point is that they command good and they forbid evil according to what the Sharia commands. Many people, they want to command good and forbid evil according to their desires. Or they want to command good and forbid evil in the wrong manner, it leads to a worse of an evil, like we were discussing the question of revolting against those rulers who are apostates, when a Muslim does not have enough strength to remove them. That's why the conditions add according to the rules of Sharia. And we should know that in changing any evil, 4 conditions must be met. The first condition is that you must be knowledgeable that this is an evil. I mean, you cannot, forbid something unless you know that it's an evil. I mean, like sometimes some brothers will take an issue which is a difference between the ulama in some matter of fiqh, in which the scholars have different concerning the authenticity of a hadith, for instance. Like, is the sunnah to come down on your hands first or on your knees first? There's a difference, a debate between the scholars classically in this issue. So they want to now forbid those people who come down on their knees first, or vice versa, or come down on their hands first. You cannot do that unless you know the arguments on both sides, if you want to forbid the evil. Now, if you want to command the good, and say, we found from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that this is a matter, that's one thing. But if you want to actually condemn and criticize and say this is wrong, you have to be then aware that this is truly an evil according to the Sharia, and aware of the arguments on both sides. The second characteristic is that your commanding of the evil should not result in a greater evil. For instance, we know the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is that when a person prays and puts his left hand on his right hand, that you remove his right hand, you put it on top of his left hand, right? So if somebody wants to come down and he sees a person putting his left hand upon his right hand and slaps him on the back of the head, this will result in a greater evil. And therefore, even though what the person was doing was wrong, you cannot justify your action here because you've led to a greater evil. In the sense that you have gone over the boundary set by Allah. The third characteristic is that you cannot change an evil with an evil. Okay? Because it's an evil to hit the person. And so therefore, you have now forbidden this evil with something which is forbidden itself. So therefore, you must not change an evil with an evil. And the fourth matter is that you should not be doing that evil yourself. That if you're going to forbid somebody, you should make sure, as we said, following the action with knowledge, that you yourself are not doing that sin or that incorrect deed. Now, the other matter is that I want to make sure that we understand that ma'ruf means whatever the Sharia has commanded, or aqal, or the reason points to it being as something which is good. And munkar means whatever the Sharia has forbidden, or reason points to which is being evil. So sometimes even though we might not have a specific hadith or ayah in the Quran showing that this is an evil thing, we can still determine that it's munkar or that it's ma'ruf because sound reasoning points to this being good or evil. Now we come to the third quality, and that is jihad to and of course the proofs of commanding good and forbidding evil I think are well known to you. The proofs that encourage us in the Sharia to do this, that we should command good and forbid evil. You can find it like in Riyadh Salihin or in other books of hadith, and ayahs in the Quran likewise. The third quality is that they wage jihad to make the word of Allah the highest. And the reason why we add this, the word of Allah the highest, because this should be the motivation of jihad. Jihad is not to show that you are courageous, or to defend your homeland, or to because you have a lot of pent-up anger that you want to release, and you go and you make jihad. No. Jihad is to make the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala supreme. And there are many verses in the Quran, and jihad will remain a duty until the day of judgment. As the Prophet ﷺ said, al-jihadu madin ila yawm al-qiyamah. That jihad will remain until the day of judgment. Now, jihad is of two types. Jihad to spread Islam, and this requires that we have an imam of the Muslims, which at this time we do not have. So there is an imam which represents the Muslims. We don't longer have that. And the second condition is jihad in self-defense, which means to check the attacks of the disbelievers, like what's happening in Bosnia, what's happening in the Philippines, in Kashmir, Afghanistan, previously, Tajikistan and elsewhere. This jihad does not require an imam. This jihad does not require that we have an imam, but rather this jihad will remain until the day of judgment. So whatever the disbelievers have attacked the Muslims, then the Muslims are required and are sinful until they check the disbelievers and remove them from the Muslim lands. And this is one of the basic rules of Ahlus Sunnah concerning this. However, though, there is an understanding of jihad by some Islamic groups which is a false understanding of jihad, which they've innovated. And I'd like to spend some moments discussing this because unfortunately a lot of brothers, when they come across, or sisters, when they come across those verses or hadith of the Prophet ﷺ which discuss jihad and its virtues and how great and numerous they are, they confuse this new concept or new methodology for jihad with those verses and those hadith. And this new methodology is a destructive methodology, and it's important that we are aware of it and that we warn one another from falling into it, and rectify this false methodology. This false methodology began in the year 1375, around the year 1965, according to a Christian reckoning of the years. And it brought a new understanding for jihad, which is against the teachings of the Sharia. It occurred due to certain situations in the Islamic world, and also due to the certain mindset of those people who propagated this, which is not important that we get into now as to why they came up with this understanding. But the point is that around 1965, this new idea of jihad, concept of jihad, was introduced in the Muslim Ummah. This idea of jihad starts off with the assumption that the Islamic world are all now societies of Jahiliyyah, and therefore everybody within those societies are disbelievers, whether they're rulers or they're ruled. The reason why is because the Sharia is no longer predominant, and because the secular laws rule the people, and also you find much corruption and disobedience to Allah and His Prophet ﷺ in these societies. So therefore everybody, whether he's a ruler or being ruled, he's an apostate. Likewise, all the Islamic aspects that you find in those societies, whether they're schools or circles for memorizing the Quran, or masajid, or scholars, they're all symbols of hypocrisy, used to deceive the Muslims to perpetuate this Jahiliyyah system. They also consider, therefore, that the masajid ought to be from Masjid Dirar, and they consider that therefore you're not allowed to pray in these masajid, and that all the imams who teach or so forth, and they're in the awqaf, the different ministries of awqaf, are therefore all kuffar and so forth. And therefore they say that the only thing we have to do is that we must wage jihad to remove this situation, because peaceful means don't bring any benefit, in the sense that since the nature of the contemporary modern state is that it's all pervasive and that it controls everything, then whenever you try to change things through preaching, they stop it, and so therefore the only way is to rectify it by force of arms. And so therefore we must revolt against the rulers in society, and the Prophet ﷺ said that we may be that in fighting, he said that that you can do trickery in fighting. So therefore we can't feign that we are not wanting to, we want peaceful means, but at the same time we are plotting harmful means, because the Prophet ﷺ said this. And also we are likewise allowed to assassinate, because the Prophet ﷺ assassinated or sent people to assassinate Ka'b bin al-Ashraf, was one of the leading Jewish rabbis who caused harm to the Muslims in Medina. And likewise all those police forces and armies who defend the rulers and profit the system, we're allowed to kill them, because there's a rule in the Sharia that if you have to, the only way for you to, like for instance the kuffar take over a Muslim city, and they put the Muslims as shields between them and the Arabs of the Muslims, then it's okay to kill the Muslims if you have to kill these kuffar. This is the classical way of interpreting it. So therefore those which support these systems you must fight and kill. And therefore we do not have to openly announce jihad, or that there are two armies meeting on a battlefield, but we can do secretive sort of activities, and, put bombs and assassinate and so forth. And therefore all the money of these people, since they're murtadeen, it's all halal for us to take and steal as we wish, because this is all part of al-ghanima. And likewise their women, since they're all apostates, we can enslave them and rape them and take them as our slave girls and so forth. And we also should not begin with fighting the people who are originally kuffar, like the Christians and the Jews, who are called kuffar asliyun, originally kuffar. But we must begin with the apostates, because they pose a greater danger to the ummah. And Islam also is what we find in the Quran and the Sunnah only. And as far as the understanding of the Sahaba or of the Salaf or the other scholars, we're not required to follow this. We're men and they're men. And that also we're allowed to enter into the different Islamic movements and try to switch these Islamic movements to our beliefs. In other words, we try to enter secretly into them and get their confidence and spread these ideas amongst them, so that we make these people believe as we believe. This is some of the characteristics of this new concept of jihad. And I wish we could have a whole day just refuting this, but the point is that just to point out some few points. They claim that all the Muslims are disbelievers, whether rulers or are ruled, is a false claim, because we know that it is true that in Islam we recognize Dar al-Harb, which is the lands of the disbelievers, and Dar al-Islam, which is the lands of the Muslims. And the definition according to the rules of the Sharia is that any land which the Sharia is ruling, it is considered Dar al-Islam. And any land in which the Sharia is not ruling is considered Dar al-Harb. And that's why the Muslims in Al-Andalus, they used to consider Al-Andalus part of Dar al-Islam, even though whole villages and whole cities would be all Christians, and just the governor would be a Muslim, because the Sharia would be enforced. even though all the citizens were disbelievers. And likewise, when in the time of colonialism, when the British and the French and the Dutch took over Muslim lands, even though the people were all Muslims and just had like a few, soldiers and a few governors and who were ruling that, since the rules were by the kuffar, they considered those lands to be Dar al-Kufr. Okay, but how do we deal with those lands, though, in which the majority of the people are Muslims, and the ruling of the Sharia is not the rule of the Sharia, it's the rule of the non-Sharia? One of the earliest fatwas that I am aware of that we have concerning the subject is that of Ibn Taymiyyah, concerning a city called Mardin, which is in southern Turkey now, close to the Syrian border, in which this city was underneath was conquered by the Mongolians, the Tartars, okay, who were obviously disbelievers and were idol worshippers. So they asked Ibn Taymiyyah, is this city considered to be a Muslim city, or is it considered to be a Kafir city? Even though the populations are all Muslims, but the ruling, by force, they're subdued by some kuffar, who, some Mongolian armies have just sort of put them under, check, and they can't do anything. Ibn Taymiyyah said that while this land is not considered Dar al-Islam, still it has aspects of Dar al-Islam in it. So one must therefore, with those aspects of Dar al-Islam, one must treat as Dar al-Islam. And those aspects of Dar al-Kufr, one must treat as Dar al-Kufr. So one must weigh both factors in that. And that's how, like most of the societies now in the Islamic world, we find aspects of Islam, like the prayers, like Ramadan, like Jama'ah, like Da'wah, like all these things. These are aspects of Islam which are supposed to be treated like that. And then we also find aspects of disbelief, like secularism, like humanism and so forth, which is being taught in the schools, and this must be dealt accordingly to that. So what they have done is they have, unfortunately, they have misunderstood the concept of Jahiliyyah, and they have spread it to such a degree that they consider everybody to be disbelievers, rulers and the ruled. And likewise, friends, that's why they won't pray behind someone else. They say you have to check out his aqidah first. Okay, and so on. Now, this movement caused some disturbance in the Islamic world in a number of places, in Egypt, in Mecca, and elsewhere. There's no reason to get into the details now. But then it was transported, and this is what's important now, was transported to the Muslims in the West by the Shia, basically. The Shia, when they had their revolution, this Iranian revolution, they tried to take advantage of these type of extreme groups who have these ideas, because they're useful tools against them. I mean, the Shia would play to their propaganda, because these groups, the Shia considered the Muslims in the Middle East to be kuffar, not because of those reasons, but because they're Sunnis, and therefore they consider them outside the fold of Islam. So they used to take those groups that have these type of ideas and spread it amongst the Muslims, and try to utilize and take advantage of these type of groups. And then these ideas after the Shiite revolution in 78 started to slowly spread amongst many Muslim youth in the West, and it resulted in the great fitna of last year with the World Trade Center. And may Allah preserve you from a fitna similar to that in this country, where you had some Muslims who are ignorant of the teachings of Islam, tried to do something in the name of Islam which ended hurting Islam and hurting the Muslims. So my point is, because I have to continue with these lectures very quickly, the rest of the points, that this understanding of jihad is a false understanding. And it is very important that we educate ourselves to the true meaning of jihad and the true manhaj of jihad according to the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, and not have in our minds a mixture of this false methodology which has appeared and spread in the Islamic world, and we must indeed warn against it. Because if you let these people take some ignorant youth with a lot of hot air in them, they're going to cause harm to you like they caused in the United States. And therefore we must stand up and be very clear about it, and have no qualms about it, that this is against the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is sinfulness. And at the same time, of course, we're very clear concerning our position concerning the kuffar. I mean, nobody is saying, that we love the Christians or something like that, or any of this sort of nonsense. So, but there's a time for everything in the Sharia, and you need to educate yourself concerning this, and inshallah ta'ala, an opportunity will be afforded to you. And you must be very careful from those brothers who come to you wearing the clothes of the Salafi with this type of voice and trying to sneak it into your ranks, because many, as I said, it's one of their aims. They feel that to take all the Islamic movements and turn it to this type of idea. And Allah knows best. Alright, we're now going to come to the next quality of this 8th point, is that they revive the Sunnah and they act toward reviving the religion, renewing the religion. We know that the Prophet ﷺ informed us in a hadith of Abu Dawood that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Azza wa Jal will, in the turn of each century, will send somebody to revive for its religion, to renew for its religion. In other words, not make a new religion as some people understand, which will fit the desires of the people. They say that this is tajdeed, in other words, to invent a new religion. But rather, they take the true religion of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and they try to revive it amongst the people and call to it. And this happens at the turn of each Islamic century. So therefore, one of the qualities of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah that you find amongst them those people who do this. And likewise you find that they also try to revive the Sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith describing who are the ghuraba, the strangers, because he said, as you know, Islam began as something strange and will return strange as it began. So blessed are the strangers. In one narration when he was asked as to who the strangers were, the Prophet ﷺ said, those who rectify what the people have corrupted of my Sunnah. So one of their aspects is that they revive the Sunnah. And this is a very clear quality that you find the people who are on the way of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in a specific sense. They're always trying to revive the Sharia and revive the Sunnah, no matter in what matter. They do not have the idea that this is an insignificant matter, but that since it's from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and since it's from the religion of Islam, therefore it has an importance, whether we recognize that or not. At the same time, you find some youth in their love of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and in their zeal to see the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ to be manifest, they sometimes show some extremism in applying the Sunnah. And I'd like to mention 5 qualities of this extremism that perhaps we can use as a check against ourselves if we come close to this extremism. And the first is that they try, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ is of 2 types. Those Sunnahs which are well known and which are obligatory in nature or well known even if they're recommended, like praying prayer on time, coming early to Salat al-Jum'ah, the growing of the beards and so forth. These are very well known Sunnahs. And there are other Sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ which, even though they're from his Sunnah, they are, unknown qualities of the Sunnah, in the sense they're not widespread of the Sunnah, and usually these are just recommended features. And sometimes you find that there's a difference of the ulama concerning these hadith concerning the Sunnah to be affirmed upon the Prophet ﷺ or not, because they usually have some weakness in these chains of narrations. So the scholars differ: do all those chains of narrations sort of strengthen this hadith to make it hasan li ghayrihi, or is it still in the weak hadith? So you find sometimes that they like to follow these strange matters, and the reason why is because one wants to make himself apparent in front of the people. This is a type of following one's desires. So you come in and you come with a Sunnah which the people are unaware of, and you do it not necessarily to teach the people, but just to sort of, the motivation is just to sort of make yourself like, look at me, see, I know the Sunnah, and you guys don't know the Sunnah. This is the first fault. The second fault is that sometimes it's an over-concern concerning those matters of the Sunnah which are recommended, in the sense that if you do it, you receive a reward, but if you forsake it, you don't necessarily punished. And with this neglect of those matters which are obligatory in the religion. Okay? Ibn Abi Hatim, who was one of the first people who mentioned and gathered in the book of Hadith the way of the Prophet ﷺ's prayer, said that in a 4-rak'ah cycle, if I'm correct, he mentioned that there are 400 sunnahs of the Prophet ﷺ in a 4-rak'ah cycle. And of course we have the book of Shaykh al-Albani, Sifat Salat al-Nabi ﷺ, which explains many of these aspects of the Sunnah. Would it make sense now, my brothers and sisters, that we learn all these aspects of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ's prayer and yet at the same time don't pray 5 times a day? That's obviously not permissible. We need to pray 5 times a day and try to pray as early as possible, at the same time learn these matters of the Sunnah. Now it doesn't mean if a person is weak and sometimes he is negligent with his prayer that he should then therefore say, okay, I'm not going to follow the Sunnah. And shouldn't make another evil and forsake that Sunnah, but rather he needs to correct himself. And therefore the focus and the emphasis always should be with those things which are obligatory, and then we fulfill the other matters. Likewise, sometimes you find some youth over-concerned with these matters of Sunnah, and yet they are negligent to what's going on around them in their society, or what's going around in the Muslim world as a whole. One must balance knowledge and his desire to know the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and also he must live in the age that he's living with. And so therefore, he is able to communicate and convey that Sunnah which he loves and is dear to his heart to those people who he is amongst. The fourth matter is that sometimes you find arguing concerning an aspect of the Sunnah over and over and over again, so that it becomes the only topic which is discussed, whether it's in a circle of knowledge, whether you ask a sheikh, or whether you want to give da'wah. Always talking about some specific matter of the Sunnah and neglecting matters which are more important. I find it surprised that some brothers, will be arguing concerning, is it the Sunnah that one moves his finger in a tashahhud or puts his finger straight and yet doesn't know Tawheed very well. He cannot express Tawheed. If you tell him teach this new Muslim what is La ilaha illallah, he has difficulty in doing. So therefore, one has to always be with the most important and the most important. And so we start first with our beliefs, and this leads us to apply the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And the fifth thing is that when we apply these praiseworthy characteristics of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, which are recommended in nature and not obligatory sometimes, we should not have an unnaturalness in our behavior in applying them. An unnaturalness in our behavior. Ibn Mas'ud, describing the best of the Ummah, which is the Prophet ﷺ's companions, he said they were the most deepest in knowledge and the most fearful in their hearts, and they were the least unnatural in their behavior. In other words, you can tell sometimes when a man is from the Sunnah, especially the scholars, when they do these recommended aspects of the Sunnah, you sense that it's become integrated into their lives. There's no unnaturalness in their behavior. And yet sometimes you find some youth who do it and you can sense it as if they're struggling and they're doing it. And so therefore the balance in them is not completely straight. Now, this doesn't mean that we should neglect the Sunnah. Don't misunderstand me. But that we need, and obviously those youth who have this shouldn't be condemned, because obviously what spurns them to apply the Sunnah in all its aspects is their love of Allah and the love of the Prophet ﷺ. And what it is that they lack examples. And especially in a country like the United Kingdom, where there's not really scholars amongst us that we can learn from their behavior and so forth. So we come across a hadith, and we have a lot of zeal, and we're not aware of the manhaj of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah, so therefore sometimes it doesn't come out as it's supposed to. So it's not, the brothers should not be condemned, they should be educated and encouraged to follow the Sunnah, but at the same time, to educate them in terms of how to apply the Sunnah. And Allah knows best. The final matter, the fifth of the 8 qualities, is that they establish the Sharia of Allah in the fifth quality. The fifth quality of this 8th characteristic is they establish the Sharia of Allah in every matter, whether major or minor. Some people have this claim that those people who from Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah in a specific sense, meaning the Salafis or the Hadith, are only concerned with the Aqidah, or they're only concerned with moving the finger and so on and stuff like that, and yet they're not concerned with the matters of the Ummah, like ruling by Allah's law and making the society obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a falsehood. For instance, one leading scholar of the Dawah Salafiyya, contemporary scholar, in his book explaining the fundamentals of the Dawah Salafiyya, being Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Khalaf, says that the Dawah Salafiyya is jihad in every sense of the word. The Dawah Salafiyya is jihad in every sense of the word. To return truth to its proper place. Dawah Salafiyya is jihad in every sense of the word, to return truth to its proper place, and to make the religion only for Allah. And to purify this ummah from this major shirk and open kufr which has spread in it. And that will not occur until the word of Allah is the most supreme, and the word of the disbelievers is trampled underfoot. And this will not occur in the lives of the people until ruling and sharia is for Allah alone, according to the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and as understood dealing with the current affairs of the Muslims in the society they live in. And therefore, to purify the ummah from this shirk by explanation and by da'wah and by jihad is required, because this issue is one of the major points of the Salafi Aqidah. So this is the truth concerning the matter, that we are not negligent concerning the secular regimes and so forth. However, though, we are men of wisdom, and we know when the Muslims are able to do something and when they're not able to do something. But our beliefs are clear, and we mention our beliefs without any shyness to it. The 9th characteristic of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they have the quality of al-wasatiyah. Al-wasatiyah does not mean wasatiyah. Wasatiyah means that they occupy a midpoint, neither being on either extreme of the two extremes, but having the best qualities of each extreme. So therefore, in matters of belief, as I explained in the cassettes of Al-Aqidah Wasatiyah, they have occupy a middle point in matters of belief between the different sects, like between those who negate Allah's attributes and those who resemble Allah with a man, like those who charge a Muslim who makes a sin as a disbeliever, like the Khawarij, and those who say that faith, iman, is not impaired by sin, but a person, even how matter sinful he is perfect in faith. And likewise, in their behavior, they do not face extremism with negligence. For instance, if we find people who are extreme in worship of Allah, or in da'wah, or in their just general behavior, we do not face this extremism with a negligence on our part. And likewise, when people are negligent, we do not face this with extremism on our part. But they are, as Allah has described them, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ وَيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْكُمْ. That they are a ummah which is wasat, which I said it means they occupy the middle position in these matters of belief and action and da'wah and behaviorism, not on any extreme, but having the truth which is on either extreme in them, that they may be witnesses against mankind, and that the Prophet ﷺ would be a witness against them. And some people misunderstand when we say that the characteristics of Ahlus Sunnah Jama'ah is that they occupy this wasat. They understand this, that you must then therefore be compromising. And there's two different things. Al-wasatiyah does not imply compromising. Compromising is against the al-wasatiyah, but rather al-wasatiyah means to adhere to a sirat al-mustaqim. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in Surah Al-Fatiha, اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Guide us and keep us upon the straight path, the path of those who you have blessed,